although there was something about his midriff that looked a bit saggy. However, his shoulders were as vast as ever and his gaze was azure and frankly rather intimidating. And there was the huge direwolf by the fire, which made her eyes widen as it looked at her with eyes that seemed to size her up and then dismiss her as a potential threat. "Well then, Asher Greyjoy," the king boomed. "Come forth. You have a message from the reader, I have heard." She bent the knee for as long as she could bear and then she straightened up and handed the letter over. The king took it with a frown, peered at the seal, cracked it with snap of the thumb and then opened it to read the contents. "How bad is the civil war in the Iron Islands?" The question came from Stannis Baratheon, who was watching her with a stony expression. She paused, considered bluffing it out a bit, and then looked the man in the eye. "Bad. My father denies that the call was real. Greenlander mummery he called it." "Did you hear it?" Stark rumbled, his eyes narrowed. She licked suddenly dry lips. "I heard it," she muttered as her mind went back to that day. "I was at sea when I heard it. It was no mummery. It was real." "But your father denies it." "Balon Greyjoy always was a fool," Stannis Baratheon rumbled. She wanted to glare at him, but she couldn't deny that his words were true. "The reader calls for help from the crown," the king said thoughtfully as he handed the letter to his brother. "Says that Balon Greyjoy is killing those who say that they heard the call." He looked at her with eyes that seemed to blaze suddenly with fury. "And he confirms the fact that your father, despite being told not to do so by me, has rebuilt the fucking Iron Fleet. Did he hate his only remaining son, a hostage here in Winterfell, that much, to risk his life?" She swallowed. That had been something that she had been hoping that the king might miss. Truth be told, she knew that father had written Theon off years before and had been grooming her as his eventual successor, even though it went against tradition. Time to tell the truth. If my father had not, then he would have been overthrown by his own lords as being weak. Bending the knee to you was hard, for many, your grace. Something odd glittered in the eyes of Robert Baratheon for a long moment. Then he smiled, or rather he bared his teeth at her. "Well, it's a moot point, I suppose. You're now your father's only potential heir at the moment. Plot a careful course." She blinked at him for a long moment as horror slowly stole over her. "Theon is dead." "No," Stannis Baratheon muttered as he passed the letter over to Stark, who read it quickly. "He's just unavailable for your father." "I don't understand." The hand of the king shrugged. "You will." But she persisted. "Is my brother dead?" "No," said Robb Stark. "He lives." Baffled and more than a bit angry, she looked about the room and then glared at the still hooded grey mist boy, who seemed to be glaring back at her angrily. "What are you staring at?" The direwolf next to the boy flattened its ears and then glared back at her, confusing her even more, but then the king spoke up again. "So your father has called for a truce and a meeting, but the reader thinks that it's a trap." She looked back, her thoughts skittering around like a seagull on a frozen pond. And I agree with him. Father does not normally do truces. He will try and gain an advantage." "You mean break guest rights?" Stannis did not ask it as a question, he merely stated it. "If it's even offered." You have the right of it," Asher admitted. "My father will, probably imprison me. For my own protection, so to speak." The words tasted bitter in her mouth, like ash leavened with burnt sea salt. "I don't know what he plans for Nuncle Roderick. But he will remove us as leaders of those who know that we have to help the Night's Watch." She paused, the next words almost closing her throat as they formed themselves in her mouth. "Father. Father gave Nuncle Victorian orders to raze Harlaw to the ground when he attacked us with what remained of the Iron Fleet. I do not know him anymore." There was a long silence as the men in the room all looked at her, even the bearded reachman who had finally stopped staring at the map on the wall and muttering things under his breath. "What help do you need, Asher Greyjoy?" the king eventually said. "What can I do?" She nodded at him. "Recognition of who we are, your grace. We represent those who heard the call. Those who know that we have to send aid to the wall. And those who know that the drowned god," she fell silent for a moment as she struggled with the words, "is wrong." They were the hardest 2 words that she had ever said in her life. The others must have realized that by the look on her face, and after a long moment she composed herself again. "Lord Harlaw," she said in a low voice, "mine uncle Roderick found runes in High Harlaw. Runes that glowed eventually and which told a tale that spoke of the drowned god being mad. A mad thing that was once one of the old gods, but who had been driven to that madness by the fight against what was behind the others." As the others frowned and bestirred themselves at her words, she pulled out a second letter. Lord Harlaw transcribed the runes and said that they should be sent to Lord Sherestone here in the north, a man who is known to mine uncle as an expert on the old ways of the first men. Nuncle Roderick said that he is a good man who can be trusted with any truth. It was Lord Stark who took the letter with a sorrowful gaze. "Lord Sherestone was my cousin. He is dead and is much mourned. But his daughter lives and carries on his life's work and is here in Winterfell, so I shall pass this on to her. You have my thanks." She nodded at Lord Stark and then looked over to the king. But the next words that were spoken came from Greymist. "A mad god. Aye, that sounds right. I saw him as a foul creature on an island made from the bones of the dead, your grace." Surprised, she looked over at Greymist again, whose head was lowered as he clutched at something strung around his neck. "What would you know of the drowned god?" "More than you," came the reply. "I have denied him. I follow the old gods now." Something prickled at her scalp. "Who are you?" Greymist, with hands that shook a little, pulled down his hood and she finally got a good look at his face. "I was once Theon Greyjoy. But no more. Today his grace allowed me to choose a new name as a bannerman of the North, in service to House Stark after my so-called father all but abandoned me. Now I am Theon Greymist. Of House Greymist. And I am a Northman." Ah. That explained so much. She was torn in a dozen different directions, wanting to snarl at him, embrace him, pity him, understand his actions. She settled for looking at his direwolf, who looked back at her with a pitiless gaze. "I think I understand," she said thickly after a moment. "We must talk, brother, but I understand. And I think that I have a solution to your problem." Stannis Baratheon broke in. "You and your uncle need support from the crown at this meeting. Then you shall have it, in the form of me. If the hand of the king attends, then not even Balon Bloody Greyjoy can try to break his word. He might have others who are not sworn to him attack, to get around breaking guests right," the king said, frowning at his brother. "Oh, and he hates you, Stannis." "I can live with that," the hand said with a bitter smile. "Besides, it's not like I'd be going alone. I'd be the dagger in the boot for Lord Harlaw." The two Baratheons stared at each other for a long moment, before the king smiled at his brother. "A dagger in the boot indeed. No, something more lethal than that." "Very well." He turned back to her and was about to speak when there was a knock at the door. "Come." The door opened to reveal a grey-haired maester, who bustled in with a message in one hand. "From Castle Sewin, your grace." As the maester left, the king unrolled the message. Then his eyebrows flew up before beetling down. Tywin Lannister was at Castle Sewin when this message was sent. He handed it to Stannis Baratheon. "He will doubtless be here tomorrow." And then he looked back at her. "I'm afraid that your trip back to High Harlaw will be delayed a few days. The Lannisters are coming." Merciless. Everything had changed, and there were times when she wanted to sit and weep for what she had lost. Most of the servants were gone, assigned to other duties, and those who were left were more reserved than they used to be, especially those who had the livery of House Baratheon. She was no longer their princess. No. Now she was just a bastard. It wasn't a nice name, or a nice term, but it now hung around her neck and would for all time now. She didn't sigh as she worked on her embroidery with the others. No, that was for the privacy of her own rooms. Instead she had to put on a brave face, the face of the bastard of House Lannister. Born of, she didn't want to think of the word, it made her skin crawl. At least Sansa Stark had not stopped being her friend. Lord Stark's eldest daughter had made a point of talking to her, asking her advice about certain stitches, especially those from the south. She liked Sansa. She was kind and cleverer than she had first thought. Certainly cleverer than Mother. Her thoughts veered away from Mother, like a frightened bird in a room. Mother scared her at the moment. She had been to see her in her room that morning and the encounter had left her shaking. Mother had assured her of a great many things. That she was still queen and that Myrcella was still a princess, that this was all just a ghastly mistake that would be rectified soon as grandfather arrived. That Joffrey would be king eventually. That Lannisters always paid their debts. And that father would pay for what he had put them all through. The look on Mother's face had been such that she had sat very, very still and eyed the door whenever Mother was ranting at the floor or the ceiling. As for the rest of the morning, well, father, she meant the king had been his usual awkward self, not knowing what to say at times and trying to be reassuring in a vague hand-patting way. She would be sent back to the Westerlands, she had been told, and he'd make sure that grandfather took care of her. There had been a sadness on Farth the king's face whenever he looked at her, and she knew that he regretted what had happened. And Tommen, well, her brother had been thinking a lot and he had come to a decision. I am going to the Citadel, he had told her that morning. I am going to be a maester. It's the only solution, Selai. There's nothing else ahead for me, is there? I'll never be a lord, or a knight, I don't have the mettle in me for that. But I like books, I like reading books. And I want to help people. She hadn't known what to say, other than to nod uncertainly and then hug her brave, tremulous little brother. She hadn't asked to see Joffrey in his cell. He was wrong in the head, she knew that now. Mad, bad and cruel, just as in some of the songs about the Madder Targaryens. She had overheard some of the guards muttering about the mad little bastard and his bruised, well, she didn't want to think about that. Apparently the wilderling girl Val had a hell of a foot on her, and the guards seemed to approve of her. There was an errant thread in her embroidery due to a slightly shaking hand and she unpicked it carefully. She would not think about Robb Stark. She would not. Her dream was dead. Are you all right there, Myrcella? It was Sansa, who was looking at her kindly. Just a slight mistake, she said quietly, her eyes misting over for a moment. But a hard blink and a wipe of the finger and all was restored again. She smiled at her friend. I'm fine. Sansa smiled back at her with something behind her eyes that spoke of unsaid words. Then she pulled a slight face. Father says that your grandfather will be here possibly tomorrow. What's he like? She paused and pulled a slight face of her own. Grandfather is very serious. Mother once said that he hasn't smiled since grandmother died. Sansa seemed to mull that over, exchanging a glance with Beth Castle, who had been frowning over her own embroidery to one side. Rumor had it that she had been keeping an eye on young Torren Roserstuk, who had a bright laugh and even brighter eyes. So how do you tell when he's happy? Beth asked. His eyes twinkle. The northern girls exchanged a glance. And how does he laugh? He doesn't. Well, not really. The odd bark. He uses words rather than laughing. The words you'll see died unsaid on her tongue. Grandfather was hardly going to be happy when he arrived. In fact, he was going to be very angry. Sansa and Beth seemed to exchange a glance that almost read her thoughts, before Sansa cleared her throat. Your grandfather can't possibly blame you for all of this, Myrcella. You never knew the truth. That was true, but her answering smile was still a sad one. I just wish I knew what the future holds for me, she said quietly. I think that I will have to wait and see. I can talk to father, or have Domeric talk to father as well, Sansa said quietly. If that would help. She shook her head. My thanks, but no, I will have to see what is decided for me. There was a moment of silent looks and then the others nodded and then they all went back to their embroidery. After a long moment she looked up. Where is Septa Mordane again? Sansa looked a bit flinty at this. According to Mother, she's having a crisis of faith. She paused and looked blankly at the others. What does that mean exactly? I'm not sure, Sansa replied, but Father's nostrils flare every time the Septa's name is mentioned. And that's never a good thing. Kevan. Dawn came too early for his liking and he groaned as he sat up and then swung his feet around to meet the rug by his bed. The room was not a large one, but then Castle Sewin was not exactly a huge hold. They had arrived the previous day, just a bit too late to keep going for Winterfell. It was just as well, because he was feeling his years. It had been a long time since he had been pushed this hard. The days after the burning of Lannisport by the Ironborn perhaps, or the ride to King's Landing at the end of Robert's rebellion. Even Tywine looked a bit worn down. The trip had unnerved him still further. The King's Road was well maintained and it needed to be given the traffic heading north. Not a continuous stream, but a steady flow of men and women heading north and south, going to and from the wall. Their arrival at Castle Sewin had seen the usual nervousness on his part about what messages they might find there, but there had been nothing new from Winterfell, thank the Seven. Lord Major Sewin had greeted them at the main gates with bread, salt and wine, along with a very keen-eyed squint at Tywine. "Lord Lannister, be welcome to Castle Sewin. Word of your arrival has already been sent to Winterfell." Tywine had nodded, murmured the appropriate words of response, sprinkled, eaten and drunk the offerings and then dismissed his men with a tilt of the chin before disappearing off to Lord Sewin's solar. Kevan had liaised with the steward of the castle about the men, sunk himself into the nearest hot bath, eaten a meal, had some wine that he sorely needed and then thrown himself into bed. And now it was dawn and he had to get up and break his fast. As he reached the entrance to the hall he saw that Lord Sewin was there, talking to his son quietly. As he approached and nodded in recognition, the older man dismissed his son and then joined him. "Your brother is a man of very few words," Lord Sewin said dryly. "As I expected from the ravens of late." He looked at Kevan and he could tell that further words of sympathy were unsaid. Which was good. Too many more words and he might fly apart into 1,000 pieces, given his rage and grief. Kevan replied eventually. "How long do you think to Winterfell?" "Half a day," came the reply. "It depends on how hard you ride." "My brother is impatient to get there," he replied wryly. "We have a hard ride ahead." This seemed to amuse Lord Sewin for some reason. Well, no one can ride as hard as Ned Stark. I'm still tired from my own ride to and from Castle Black, and I wasn't even in the party that made Ned Stark's great ride south." His face tightened. Hard truths were said at Castle Black. Cold reality is never easy to face. He stared at the man. "I'm sorry, what hard truths? Is this about the call?" "We ride to Winterfell to find out the truth of the matter." This time it was Lord Sewin's turn to stare at him. "Surely the cages would have told you of that." "What cages?" Lord Major Sewin turned and directed a look of utter astonishment at him. "You have not seen any of the cages that the Night's Watch have been bringing south from the wall?" "No, what cages?" The Lord of Castle Sewin ran his hands over his face and then harumphed. "The cages that proved the call. Fortunately a party of men from the Night's Watch came in late last night. They have a cage. I suggest that you get your brother, your leading lords, like that Westerling fellow, and meet me in the hall behind me." "I don't understand." "You'll find out why Ned Stark allowed 100,000 wildlings through the wall to settle in the Gift and the New Gift this winter. Get your brother, Sir Kevan." Lord Sewin vanished into the hall and Kevan stared at his retreating back for a moment, before turning on his heel and then walking back into the courtyard, which was starting to fill up with Lannister men, most of them yawning. Tywine was one of them, already dressed in his riding leathers and looking flinty. "There you are," Tywine grated, "we need to be on the road as soon as possible." "Sewin wants a word, he says it's important." "Doubtless he does," Tywine replied, his nostrils flaring as he pulled his riding gloves on. "I'm not interested in what he has to say, however. Let us leave. He talked of cages that prove the call. And then he said that Ned Stark has allowed 100,000 wildlings into the Gifts, based on presumably these cages." Tywine switched his gaze from his gloves to Kevan. "What cages?" "He said that there is one in the hall and we should see it." "He also said that Ned Stark allowed in 100,000 wildlings, did he?" "Really? Nonsense. There cannot be even a quarter, no, a tenth of that number north of the wall. The place is a desolate hellhole of ice and snow. And yet he says to come and see." Tywine looked at him for a long moment. "Are you saying that I should come?" "Not me. He is. But I think that you should. We should." The man looks intent. There was a long pause as Tywine openly mulled all of this. And then he pulled his riding gloves off reluctantly and tucked them into his belt. "Very well," he snarled. "But this had better be worth it." He turned to one side. "Westerling. Join me." Lord Westerling appeared to one side, chewing on a piece of bread. "What's amiss?" Our host has a cage of some kind from the wall that he wishes us to see. We will go, look for a heartbeat, and then leave this place. Winterfell calls. Tywine stamped off with his nostrils flared and therefore missed the look on Westerling's face as the bread all but fell from his hand, before he gathered himself and walked after Tywine. Kevan frowned and caught up with the man. What's wrong? My son wrote to me that he had seen something in a cage that he could not explain, something that I would have to see for myself. He said that it would change me, as it had changed him. He looked at Kevan and something cold went up and down his spine for a moment due to the look in the man's eyes. His handwriting was shaky when it came to those words. Dread cooled in his stomach and he strode on, into the hall. Ahead he could see Lord Sewin, taking to two men dressed in black. On the table to one side there was a shrouded shape that looked squarish. Tywine came to a halt in front of the table. Lord Sewin, he said shortly. You wish me to see something? The Northman looked at Tywine with a certain something in his eyes and after a moment he looked at one of the men of the Night's Watch and raised an eyebrow. The older man in black stepped forwards, nodded a half-bow, and then looked at them all. Alex, no, my lords, of the Night's Watch. Newly come from the Shadow Tower with a cage that was found there, with, new contents. Tywine glowered at the man. What contents, man? Snow stepped back from the table. Best that you see it for yourself, my lord. We have been told that when men who have not seen a cage ask about them, they must discover the truth for themselves. There was a pause whilst Tywine flared his nostrils again for a long moment, before he finally stepped forwards. Very well, he all but snarled. Let us get this mummery over with. He reached out and snatched the cloth away from the shape, to reveal a cage that contained a head. Whoever's head it was had been a man, with black hair and a scar across his nose and time seemed to stop as the head in the cage suddenly opened very blue eyes and then hissed at them all before gnashing its teeth. After a long moment Kevan seemed to unfreeze himself from his suddenly rigid posture. What is this thing? But oddly enough it was Tywine who answered. The runes on the cage explains it, brother. Proof of white, or close enough to that. He looked at Snow. This is real. The man of the Night's Watch spread his hands. You may pick it up to see for yourself, Lord Lannister. It is no trick. No mummery. To be fair, he could not but admire his brother's nerve as he reached out with hands that did not shake to pick up the cage and then jiggle it about so that the head bounced about enough to see the white of the severed spine at the base of the skull. Then he replaced it on the table. I see. The words were said flatly. And then, you have my thanks, Snow. And you, Lord Sewin. Tywine pulled his riding gauntlets from his belt and then turned on his heel. We ride for Winterfell at once, he told Kevan, but there was something in his eyes, just for a moment, that said that he was shaken. Kevan nodded, still rooted to one place as he stared at the head of what had to be a white. His mind was whirling like a sycamore seed from the implications. Whites. Whites were real. After a long moment he turned and walked from the hall. And as he did so he noticed that Gregor Clegane had followed them in and was staring at the head of the white with a look that almost amounted to fear. Daenerys. According to the songs and legends, the great heroes and heroines of yesteryear would roll themselves up in their blankets at night, put their heads on the grass and slept easily. Given the aches and pains she had on waking up that morning, the songs and legends were nothing but a load of tosh, as old Sir Willem would have said. She looked out over the rolling hills of Andalos and sighed a little before wincing as something in her neck complained. Well, perhaps the ride today would somehow get the kinks out. That's all they had been doing for some days now. Just riding north into Andalos. It was quite beautiful, in a way. Andalos. The place where the Andals had come from. It was just so hilly and empty. Mile after mile of nothing. Apart from the hummocks. The hummocks disturbed her. According to Lord Varys, they were the remains of buildings. Farmhouses and other places long since fallen into less than rubble. The Andals were gone from here. Or rather, almost gone. They had passed through a small village yesterday, which had been a strange experience. Varys had made her pull her hood up before they had reached it. Memories of the Valyrians run deep here, Varys had told her. And of other, darker things. He had said nothing more and had dealt with the negotiations in the village for more food. From what she had heard, the villagers spoke the common tongue, but with archaisms. A lot of thee and thou. And they had stared at her with deep suspicion. Few passed through this area, Varys had told her afterwards. Pentos claims this area, but does nothing with it. So few know what's out here. Illyrio and I were the first in years to start asking questions about it. The people there know me, which is why I did all the talking back there. She yawned tiredly and then pulled her robes closer around her before walking over to where Varys was talking to the senior Unsullied guard, a tall grey-eyed man called Black Rat. There were 20 of the Unsullied with them, those that apparently Illyrio Mapatis had left to Varys in his will, although from what he had said there might be others somewhere. "How are you today, my dear?" Varys asked. His head and cheeks were freshly shaven and she wondered just why he needed to keep himself so trim. That and where he had gotten the hot water. "I am still not used to sleeping on the ground," she replied with a yawn. "And I could do with a bath. But you warned me of those things and I am fine otherwise." Varys smiled briefly and then nodded at Black Rat, who stamped, turned on his heel and left, bellowing orders as he left. A servant approached and handed over platters of ham and bread, along with a flask of what must be well-watered wine, and Varys waved her to a pair of camp stools as they broke their fast. "We will be at our destination by noon," Varys told her. "And there will be ample chance there to rest and bathe." Illyrio liked his luxuries and Bolt Hole is well equipped and provisioned. This was the first time that he had told her where they were headed for and she raised her eyebrows at him. "Bolt Hole?" Lord Varys smiled at her briefly. Illyrio was always a man with a plan. And then a backup plan in case anything happened. And then a backup plan in case the backup plan went wrong. Bolt Hole is aptly named. It was his fallback position in case of disaster at Pentos. She thought about that and then nodded. Such as Pentos being attacked. The memory of seeing that black and greasy smoke on the horizon was a dark one. "Just so, my dear. And Illyrio built it in a place where not even Andals will go." She paused and stared at him. "I don't understand." Varys smiled slightly at her as he ate the last of his bread and ham and then swigged from the flask. "You will. I will explain as we go." That explanation did not come for a while. Once again they all saddled up, once again she fed her dragons and made sure that they were all right before mounting her own horse, and once again they set out into the hilly terrain. Here and there she saw a herd of what looked like wild cows, and once again here and there she saw the hummocks. As the sun climbed high and higher in the sky and they rode down what might have been the remains of an old road that had been abandoned long before, she finally found Varys riding next to her. "Do you see those low rises on the horizon?" Varys asked. She peered at where he was pointing to, westwards. "I do. By the mound." "Aye. That's the remains of what was once the largest town in Andalos. All gone now, thousands of years ago. Nothing but low shapes on the horizon." "But the mound. You know your history, my lady. Of the Andals." "I think I do," she said cautiously. "But now that I have seen this place I am not as sure as I was. This land is very empty." "Why?" "Oh, many reasons. A lack of settlers for one. But also because the Andals that remain here, remember. They remember dread. And the mound is a reminder. They avoid this place, just as there are certain words that the few inhabitants here avoid. One is Stark. She frowned. "I thought that Theon Stark, the hungry wolf, only raided the shore of Andalos." "Oh, he did more than that. A fascinating subject, history." Lord Varys smiled a very odd little smile. Full of doors opening and shutting, closing off some things that might have been. Oh, what might have been? He seemed to catch himself after a moment and then refocus. Anyway, there were always things about the Andal invasion of Westeros, and the North's reaction to it that always puzzled me. Why the North was so defensive at first, before attacking Andalos in the way that it did. She frowned. Their friends to the south were being invaded, why would they not attack? Yes, but they were armed with bronze whilst the Andals had iron. And then I realized something. Theon Stark was a man driven to defend his homeland. A man driven by war, a man who knew that you needed every advantage in war. I researched the history of the time. The North dealt with the Andal attacks on its shores not with bronze swords at times, but with flights of arrows. And there are references to prisoners. It makes sense. How else could they have divined the secret of iron, other than from Andal prisoners? She thought about that and then pulled a face. You think that they tortured people for the secret of iron? Of course. Theon Stark was a man seeking to protect his people, to pass on what he could to his son. I imagine that torture was the first thing that came to mind. And then he needed time. Time to find deposits of iron in the north, to mine it, refine it, work it, and then use it. Varys looked around at the hills around them. The histories are wrong, you see. He didn't just raid the shores of Andalos. Oh, so many had left, before then, driven by the thought of plunder and free land, by the fact that the Valyrians were coming, that others wanted to raid other places, and so on. No, Theon Stark came to drive a knife into the heart of Andalos. He went beyond the coast to there, the place where the 1st September stood. By that mound. She looked at the mound on the horizon. What is that mound, Lord Varys? When the hungry wolf came to Andalos, he had his men kill everyone they found. Men. Women. Children. And then he had his men behead the bodies. The mound, that is where they left the heads. And they left, back to the north. She stared at him and then back at the mound on the horizon. But, oh, they also covered it with sod and grass, and the mound had settled due to, well, rot, but yes. It's 70 feet tall and 300 long. Imagine the numbers. And that is why the local Andals avoid the place. And why the name Theon Stark is a curse word here. He looked ahead of them and then smiled as a long low farmstead came into view. Bolt hole. We are here. Tyrion. Will everything have to have fur on it at the wall? Jaime asked as he held up the black cloak with its fur at the collar and peered at it. Not everything, Tyrion said with a smile that he did not entirely feel inside. It was earlier in the morning than he was normally awake at, but Jaime was leaving for the wall with the latest party, and he had no intention of missing a moment of his brother's remaining time in Winterfell. Small clothes with fur is a bad idea. Too sweaty. Something that might have been almost a smile flashed over his brother's tired, drawn, face. He still looked as if he hadn't been getting nearly enough sleep. Not that Tyrion blamed him. He had been discussing the implications of everything with Uncle Geryon, which were horrific enough for their family, plus father was due sometime today. Jaime wanted to avoid father. He held out a fat envelope. Here. What's this? Jaime frowned as he took it. Everything I could remember about the wall. What it's like, what the people are like, what the temperature is like, everything I could think of from my time there. This time the smile was a little more long-lasting, if considerably more wry. Thank you, Jaime sighed eventually. You're a better brother than I deserve. Pish-posh, Tyrion replied with a wave of his hand. It's the least I can do. Besides, you're supposed to be impressed by my heroics at the wall. Jaime tilted his head and looked at him. This is me, Tyrion. You only use the words pish-posh when you're trying to hide the fact that you are upset. He sighed. I don't know when we'll meet next. But then he glared at Jaime. But we will meet again, so don't go getting all maudlin on me. This war that is coming at the wall. Robert Baratheon is right, it is the Great War and it is here. That ghost of a smile came and went again. We're Lannisters. We don't do maudlin, brother. We smirk at each other and then slap each other on the back. He looked at the cloak again. Maybe you're right though. We will meet again. Perhaps you'll be married by then. He felt himself turn slightly pink. More than likely. Tyrion, there's something you need to know. About, but he was interrupted by a scuff of the boot on a flagstone and they both looked over to see Sir Barristan Selmy approach, with a certain flinty look about the eyes. Lord Tyrion, the old Kingsguard said with a nod. Sir Jaime. He came to a halt before them and then looked Jaime up and down. You depart for the wall. Before you go there you should know that a raven came from King's Landing. Lord Arryn wrote that your tale of wildfire has been confirmed. Jaime's chin came up, but no smile crossed his face. He was too busy staring at Selmy. What? What else? Selmy cleared his throat roughly. The numbers were worse than you had stated. More than 1,000 barrels were hidden beneath the city. 300 alone were in the lowest level of the Red Keep. Tyrion gaped and felt almost faint for a moment as he did a swift calculation in his head. That many would have been enough to level the Red Keep. Right down to the bedrock. My gods, and were the same number in the other places that Jaime mentioned. About 250 each under the Great September and the Dragon Pit, and 50 barrels under each gate. Other caches as well. Enough to destroy the city. You were right to kill Aes and Rossart. Jaime's eyes had widened hugely and he swallowed. I knew that they had planned such a madness, but the scale, my gods, 300 barrels under the Red Keep. I thought it was half that number. His Grace the King and the Lord Hand were stunned as well. Messages are being sent to King's Landing. He pulled out a small pouch from where he had been holding it in the folds of his cloak and then tossed it over to Jaime. Here. Don't open it. Visibly confused, Jaime looked at the pouch. What is it? The ashes of your white cloak. Jaime flushed and glared at the pouch. In response, Sir Barristan placed both hands on the pommel of his sword. I have never understood you, Lannister. You joke and jape and make comments that you think are clever, but you can be serious when it is needed. You are a decent swordsman. And you did the right thing when you killed Aes. You fulfilled your vow as a knight to protect the innocent, saving King's Landing from an insane king. You did what I could not. You became the best of us in that moment. You broke your first oath to a king for the noblest of reasons. And then you broke your second oath to a king for the basest, most carnal, of reasons. The old King's Guard stepped forwards. Sir Davos Seaworth wears his knuckle bones in such a pouch to remind him of what he has. Wear that pouch as a memory of what you once were, the greatest of us all before you fell. Try and become such a man again. The wall shows the true mettle of a man. We'll have to see what emerges. And with those words he strode off again. Jaime stared at his retreating back and then looked at the pouch again with some distaste. Well, he said eventually, I suppose I should be grateful that he didn't smear my face with the ashes. Don't lose that pouch though. They both jumped slightly and then turned to look at Uncle Geryon, who had been watching the whole thing to one side. It's important. Tyrion looked at his uncle carefully. He seemed very serious. Why? It's just ashes. Uncle Geryon strode forwards and looked at Jaime intently, laying a hand on his right shoulder. Because Selmy is right. You need to show what you're made of at the wall. Don't throw that pouch away. I can see that you want to. I see it in your eyes, nephew. You need to keep it. Seeing it will drive you to change. To be the better man that I know is within you. Uncle Jaime started to say with a slight frown on his face, Jaime, listen to me. Keep that pouch. I had a dream about this. Nebulous strange things, dreams, but this one was clearer than some others I have had in the past. You were on a narrow path, with fog on either side. When you kept the pouch you stayed on that path. Without it you wandered away into the fog and were lost. His brother stared at their uncle, his face pale. You've changed, Uncle Geryon, he said eventually. You've changed. Uncle Geryon smiled crookedly and then he pulled his eye patch to one side so that they could both see the terrible hole in his face. I had to change, he said. I'm not the same man who sailed away to find Bright Raw. This changed me, as did other things. Look at me, Jaime, not at your boots. You need to change now. It's time. We'll meet again at the wall. Be safe, nephew. He replaced the eye patch, embraced a white-faced Jaime and then strode off in the same direction as Sir Barristan. There was something of a pause as Tyrion waited for Jaime to recover himself and, truth be told, to pull himself together a bit. After a while Jaime put the pouch away in his robes, turned to Tyrion and then sighed as he caught sight of something over his shoulder. One of my new brothers is standing over there and scowling at me, so it's time to go. I'm sorry that I'm leaving you to deal with father, but frankly I can't face him. Tyrion nodded choppily. I'll take care of father. And I'll keep an eye on Tommen and Myrcella. His brother looked sadly at him for a moment. I'm not their father, Tyrion. I fathered them, but I've never allowed myself to think of them as my children. I couldn't. He took a deep breath, looked at Tyrion as if he was about to say something and then paused and sighed. Your lady love approaches. Be safe, brother. Take care. He squatted down a little so that he could hug him and then he walked off, his face creased with lines of care. Tyrion turned to look at Daisy, who was watching him with a slightly worried look. Daisy. Tyrion. She nodded at Jaime's departing figure. Cat told me that he leaves for the wall this morning. Are you all right? No, he muttered, squinting at his feet for a moment and then looking back up again. I will be though, with time. And then something occurred to him. I have talked to Ned Stark, as you suggested, after you talked to him as well, but I have just realized that I have not asked you the most important question of all. Will you be my wife, Daisy Sherestone? I have very little to offer you, save my heart, but I love you. And I love you. Of course I will be your wife, she smiled as she leant down and kissed him on the lips. Was there ever any doubt with that? My father is coming, he muttered as he wondered why her lips had felt like rose petals, and he might have something to say about that. She clasped her hands together in front of her and tilted her head slightly. Then I shall have something to say to him. And with that they watched as Jaime got into his saddle and then trotted his horse to join a group of men in black at the northernmost gate. His brother turned in his saddle and nodded at him, before they all rode out of the gate. Heading north. Ned said that they'll take the old road north of here, Daisy told him quietly. They won't meet your father. Good, Tyrion answered. And then he set his own chin. There's a lot that my father needs to know. Robb. Father stalked up and down in front of them all, his eyes hard and uncompromising as he inspected them all. He sniffed a bit as he came to a halt to one side, glared at them all again and then nodded slightly. Ah, you'll do, he said grudgingly. Not bad. He exhaled slightly in relief and swapped a glance with Grey Wind, who looked almost as relieved as he felt. To one side Frostfire snorted, but if that was in admonishment at father or at the other direwolves in the room, he wasn't sure. He also noticed that Jon and Theon, as well as their own direwolves, relaxed a little as well. The three of them were all in clothes that rivaled what they wore the day the king arrived. Right, now listen to me, father said, making them all straighten a little. Tywin Lannister is a proud, prickly, arrogant man who has a mind for intrigue and a very long arm. He eyed Robb for a moment and he nodded a little, remembering that other life for a moment. Father then continued, and above all he comes after his family has been publicly humiliated. The revelation of his children's incest and treachery will have hit the old lion hard, very hard indeed. Do not smile at him. Do not make him think that he is a figure of scorn, pity or ridicule. Be as serious as you can around him. Do not give him the slightest reason to complain, and if he is foul-tempered then he might see offense in the smallest of things. So be wary. Word has come to me that his party contains some rather interesting men. His brother Kevan is with him, which is a good thing, he's a good, solid man. Be careful around him as well though. And there's Sir Gregor Clegane. Yes, Robb, the mountain is coming. I've warned the servants. I've also warned the hound. The mountain's coming. Jon asked, scowling a bit. Why did he bring him? The man's a monster. Father said, scowling himself. I remember what he did in the Red Keep. I also remember the reports of the way that he behaves at times, which is why I warned the servants. Your sisters too. Theon's face twisted a little. Lord Stark, what do we do if the mountain does attack someone though, and we witness it? Call for help at once. Scream if you have to. There's no shame in seeking help against a man like that. He's been known for beating women to death after raping them. Be wary of him. They all nodded. Father swept them all with a gaze and then nodded. Right. Have any of you seen Bran and the other two members of the terrible threesome? The other two looked at Robb, who smirked. I delivered them into the hands of Shireen and told her to keep them out of trouble. The last time we saw them she was organizing them. Father looked at him with a raised eyebrow and a slightly twitching mouth that spoke of a smothered smile. Excellent, he said after a while. I'm proud of you. Bran will sulk mightily, but she'll keep that lot out of trouble. Right, let's get ready. He swept out, Frostfire at his side, and the three looked at each other. Right, John said eventually. So, now we wait. What do we do whilst we wait? They ended up just sitting on a bench watching as Winterfell organized itself around them, often thanks to some barked commands from father. They watched as Arya was chased out of the Godswood by Mother, as Septa Mordane swept past deep in thought and as Maester Lewin scurried about with messages. And they watched as Gendry appeared wearing new clothes and looking as if he wanted the ground to open up and swallow him right there and then. They looked at the blacksmith as he wandered past them and then looked at each other. Any word on what the king will do with that one? Theon asked in a cautious low voice. I mean, will he legitimize his bastards? There was a pause as they all mulled this over. And then a collective shrug. Father hasn't said anything, Robb admitted. And the king has to do something. Marry again. Legitimize his bastards. Or stay with Lord Stannis as his heir. But House Baratheon's a bit thin right now. But he never got a chance to finish what he was about to say, because all of a sudden there was a shout of Jon Stark, that made them all jump, just before a furious red-haired figure appeared in a dress. It was Ygritte and she seemed to be extremely angry. What? Jon asked, as bewildered as the rest of them. This thing. She plucked at the dress. Apparently you mentioned to Mance that my furs had started to smell a bit, so he talked to Lady Stark and she found this fucking thing for me. What the bloody hell is the point of the hole at the bottom? The wind's blowing right up me ass, and as for me. Jon turned bright red and threw his hands up. I'm sorry. I never thought that you wouldn't. He paused. I thought that you'd seen dresses before. Spearwives do not wear things like this. She barked at him. And the breeze around my ass would kill me north of the wall. I didn't think that there'd be this little to it. Wait, what about your small clothes? She paused, her eyes narrowing. Nothing like that was delivered. It must have. Let me ask Lady Stark for you. There must be more. And with that he escorted her away, gabbling quite a bit and still red-faced. Robb and Theon watched them go, both with mouths twitching, and the moment that they were out of sight they both dared to look at each other, and then they both howled with laughter, laughing until the tears ran down their faces. And when they heard a faint cry of "I heard that, you buggers," they laughed even harder. Gods, Theon giggled eventually. Do you think that poor bugger has a clue? No, Robb wheezed when he was able to. That girl has her eye on him. But can you imagine her in charge of a keep? It would never lack for rabbits, she'd always be out with that bow of hers. And that set them both off for a while again. When they finally recovered, Theon pulled a slight face. I wonder who Lady Greymist will be. Whoever you want it to be, Robb said, slapping him on the shoulder. Who knows? Theon smiled wryly and peered at his feet. I like Ros. From Wintertown. But then she's a whore. Might not be the best lady for Castle Greymist, wherever that might be. Any thoughts on where you want that castle to be? His friend scowled a little. The Stony Shore perhaps. You need someone there to keep an eye on those Ironborn buggers. Build a western fleet for the north. Or a flotilla at least. He eyed Theon for a long moment. He said thickly. I can't think of anyone better to have there. The moment was broken by a horn blast from the South Gate House, a high and clear note. Voices were heard shouting down and up, and after a long moment Jory Castle came into view. A column of men in red to the south, my lords, he panted. Riding hard for Winterfell. He stood quickly. Their numbers. 100 of them at least, Lord Robb. Very well, tell my father Lord Stark and his grace the king that Tywin Lannister is here. As Jory ran off he exchanged a grim look with Theon. And now it begins. Kevan. The moment that the towers of Winterfell appeared on the horizon, something seemed to freeze deep in his bowels. The capital of the north, and they were riding in there to see what had happened to his niece and nephew. But there was something else. Was Lancel all right? Had he been harmed? Of course he was all right, of course he was well. This was the north, where guest right was inviolate, but there was still the small terrified voice of fatherly fear. The closer they got, the more he could sense the tension amongst the men, including bloody Clegane. Apart from Tywin, that is. He was riding with his usual stony face. But he knew his brother and he could see the signs of tension here and there, the set of an eyebrow, the lines on either side of his mouth. He knew that Tywine was strained. As they approached the gatehouse that the road led to, he could feel the eyes on them all. He could also see that Wintertown, the so-called temporary town by Winterfell, was being worked on by large numbers of men and women, whilst what looked like barley and oats were being grown in the fields everywhere. The banner of House Stark seemed to be flying everywhere, but it was the largest flag flying from the highest tower that made him wince a little. It was the Baratheon stag, showing that the king was in residence. And nowhere was the Baratheon Lannister flag that Cersei always insisted on. Approaching the main gate, he could see that there was a head on a spike above it, and his stomach roiled for a moment as he peered up at it. Tywine did the same, but it was the head of an unknown man who seemed to have been scorched somehow. Through the gate they rode, and inside the first courtyard, where he could see large numbers of men bearing the colours of houses Stark and Baratheon. And first amongst them were Lord Eddard Stark, who was standing there with some kind of mace at his hip, and his grace the king, Robert Baratheon, and he stared at the man. He had been in King's Landing the previous year on Tywine's business, and he had been quietly contemptuous at how Baratheon had let himself go, becoming fat and lazy. But the man in front of him was not that man. No, this was the Robert Baratheon of Pike again, almost the demon of the trident. Tyrion had written that the man had been driving himself hard of late. Well, this was the truth of it. Stannis Baratheon was next to his brother, the handpin prominent in his jerkin, and he could see Catelyn Stark and what must have been the Stark children next to her. One looked remarkably like Ned Stark and another looked like a Tully, so based on what he had read of the Starks, one must be the bastard and the other the heir. Both were looking at Tywine warily, although there was something about the eyes of the heir that made him pause. As he dismounted and joined Tywine and the others in bending the knee to the king, he flashed a quick look at the crowd, and to his relief he could see Lancel standing there, very much alive and unharmed. The little voice of fear shriveled and died. "Rise, Lord Lannister," the king rumbled, and as he rose he could see that Sir Barristan Selmy was behind him, clutching a large and ancient sword. "Be welcome to Winterfell." His voice was as powerful as ever, but there was something else. Anger. Stark stepped forwards, one hand on the head of that mace, and then waved a hand at some servants, who strode forwards with bread, wing and salt. "Welcome to Winterfell, Lord Lannister," said Stark. "Welcome to the north." Tywine partook on behalf of them all and then turned to the king. "Your Grace, word reached on our way here of certain events here at Winterfell. We must talk of them before anything else." "Agreed," the king rumbled. There was something in his voice that he just couldn't put his finger on. Was it angry anticipation? Lord Stark foresaw this and has offered the use of his solar. "We'll go there now." As the king, his hand and Lord Stark strode off towards a doorway, Tywine glanced at Kevan and grunted just one word over his shoulder before joining them, "Come." He nodded back but then quickly walked over to Lancel, who met him halfway. They embraced quickly. "You're all right?" Kevan asked, looking high up and down. "Not." He looked around quickly at the milling crowd as they helped the Lannister men to dismount. "Not mistreated?" Lancel shook his head, blonde hair flying. "No, father. Not at all. It's been difficult, but Uncle Geryon has been keeping everyone informed as to what was happening. Under control as well. It's so good to see you though." He smiled, stealing a glance at the doorway through which Tywine was stepping. He'd have to scurry to join them. "Good, I was worried." And it was then that the words that his son had said hit him. "Wait. Uncle Geryon?" "Yes, father." "Lancel, your Uncle Geryon died years ago." "People keep saying that," said a very familiar voice behind him. "But I got better." He turned on his heel and then felt his eyes widen a very great deal. "Geryon." It was Geryon. He had an eye patch and was thinner, and there were lines on his face and traces of grey at his temples that had not been there before, but it was Geryon. "Good gods," he said faintly. "Geryon." Kevan, his brother, said with a quirked smile. Then he looked him up and down. "You got fat." "Geryon." He had no words. "Gods, brother, don't tell me that you're going to faint like Tyrion did when he first saw me." He shook his head and then strode up to his brother and hugged him. "Damn it, Geryon," he choked out, "we all thought you were dead." Geryon hugged him back for a long moment and then broke away and held him at arm's length. I'm hard to kill. And it's all a long story. I'm sorry I wasn't here to stand by the king and see Tywin's face when you rode in, but I had to send a letter. Illyrian. This shout brought up a young man with rather darker skin, but the undoubted look of a Lannister. Geryon laid a hand on the lad's shoulder. Your mother has written. You have twin brothers. She has named them Tytos and Tyok. What looked like tension left Illyrian's shoulders and he closed his eyes and nodded, before looking at Kevan. Sir Kevan, I am Illyrian. Your nephew. He looked at his new nephew for a long moment, taking in his looks, his expression of carefully hidden shyness. I am glad to meet you, nephew, he said warmly. And then he recalled where he was. Your pardon, I must get to Lord Stark's solar at once. I will take you there, I am due there too. Geryon smiled as he clapped a hand on Kevan's shoulder. Now, I will bet you a silver stag that Tywin's first words on seeing me will be a simple statement that I am still alive, followed by him asking if I found Brightraw. He pulled a slight face. Mayhaps. Did you? Geryon's smile faltered for a moment. It's a long story. He nodded and started to walk towards the doorway. And then he remembered what was just as important. Cersei and Jaime, where are they? Geryon's smile vanished. Both alive, he said grimly. But she's in a guarded room here in Winterfell and Jaime's head for the wall. He's a man of the Night's Watch now, Kevan. The doorway loomed ahead. Geryon, what happened? His brother faltered slightly as they passed through it. Foolishness, selfishness and stupidity, the like of which I have never seen. The king will tell you and Tywin what happened. A sigh. We Lannisters will be facing the implications of this for years afterwards. For years. Ned. His father had laid down some Arbor gold years before the rebellion. At Harrenhal Brandon had joked that as soon as he became Lord of the North he'd drink it all. After Ned had become the Lord of the North he had barely touched any of it. Now, however, it was time to use it and he poured out 4 goblets of it and then handed one to Robert, one to Stannis and the other to Tywin Lannister, who was looking about the solar with carefully hidden interest, particularly in the map. My apologies, Your Grace, Lord Stark, I thought that my brother was following me more closely than it seems that he was. Hey. Geryon had been talking to Lewin about something, so he hadn't been in the courtyard when his brothers had arrived. Well, now he was very likely going to see it close up. There was a knock on the door and Sir Barristan entered. Your pardon, Your Grace, but she's back, Lord Stark. Robert raised an eyebrow, took a sip of wine which hid the amused tilt to his lips. Then he looked at the wine, raised the other eyebrow and nodded at Ned in appreciation. A fine wine, Ned. The door opened fully and Frostfyre padded through and went to Ned's side, where she then stared at the Lord of the Westerlands. He had to give the old lion his due, he barely reacted to the sight of the huge creature. Instead Lord Lannister merely nodded slightly. An impressive beast. Tyrion wrote to say that you had acquired a direwolf. He nodded and then the door opened again to reveal a somewhat white-faced Kevan Lannister. He at least stopped and stared at the sight of Frostfyre, until he was apparently poked in the back by Geryon Lannister, who stepped into the room, closed the door firmly and then nodded at his oldest brother. Tywin. There was a pause as Tywin Lannister stared at his brother, his eyes just a bit wider than they had been, one hand frozen in midair in front of him and then the hand closed. The eyes narrowed a little and he leant back and took a sip of the wine that Ned had poured for him. Geryon. Still alive, I see. Did you find Brightraw? Geryon smiled and extended a hand in the general direction of Kevan, who scowled and dug into a pocket to place a coin into that hand. I bet Kevan a silver stag that one of the first things you asked me would be about Brightraw. We shall talk of it later. I have it. And he flipped the eye patch up to show the terrible hole in his face. What it cost me. The eye patch was flipped down and then Geryon sat firmly down in a chair and with a nod and a smile accepted the goblet of wine that Ned had poured for him. There was another pause as Tywin Lannister stared hard at his brother and then the moment passed as he looked at Robert. Your Grace. I have come to Winterfell to ascertain the truth of this call that has roiled across the land. But on the way word reached me of certain allegations about my son and daughter. Your Grace, I must ask this question first: where are Jaime and Cersei? Robert's nostrils flared a bit. You deserve to hear this from me first, Lord Lannister. Cersei is in a room here in Winterfell under guard. She is no longer my wife. I have annulled the marriage due to her behavior, to put it politely, with her own brother. Behavior that amounts to treason. As for Jaime, he is on his way to the Wall, where he will join his new brothers of the Night's Watch. He has sworn his vow, joined the Order and left this morning. Tywin Lannister's own nostrils flared for a moment as his knuckles whitened around his goblet for a moment, but he seemed to ignore Kevan Lannister's groan of dismay. He opened his mouth for a moment and then he closed it and seemed to gather his thoughts before starting again. I take it that the accusation of incest that has been made against them is a real one. Both accusation and proof were real, Robert said in a voice like thunder. I wish with all my heart that they were not, but they were seen engaging in open fornication by my hand Lord Baratheon, Lord Stark and Sir Barristan Selmy, as well as others. The knuckles whitened again around the goblet. There could be no chance of misinterpretation. None, Stannis said in a voice like iron. They were both naked, he was inside her and she had her legs wrapped around him. Kevan gave a groaning sigh again, whilst Tywin's lips thinned for a heartbeat into near invisibility. I see, he said eventually. And I understand the annulment. May I ask about the circumstances in which they were discovered? And here was the dangerous ground. He leant forward slightly. Jaime Lannister was observed beforehand acting in a highly suspicious manner, taking bedclothes to an unoccupied room in the Broken Tower. Given the nature of the vows of the King's Guard, this was peculiar. When his sister joined him, this was beyond peculiar. A party was formed and they were discovered in the act of incest. Tywin Lannister's left eyebrow twitched upwards for a moment. And what of the children? Robert pulled a face. They are his, he said heavily. I wish that it was not so, but it is true. They are his. Says who? Tywin snapped. What proof is there? His own words, Stannis snapped back. Your son Jaime wrote a full confession, recounting his actions. His crimes. He handed a scroll over to Robert, who seemed to weigh it in his hands for a moment. Lord Lannister, he did not write this under duress, Robert rumbled after a moment. He wrote this of his own free will. He was not tortured into it. And he was allowed to join the Night's Watch for two reasons. The first was his free confession. And the second was more complicated. You and I and Sir Kevan there and every man of the armies that we led into King's Landing on the day of the death of Aerys Targaryen owe their lives to your son, Ned said hoarsely. Because Jaime admitted the true reason why he killed the last Targaryen king. He did not do it to please you, or to curry favor with what were then the rebels, but to save the city. The old lion's forehead creased slightly. I don't understand. Tywin said Geryon gently, did you not ever wonder why Aerys chose Rossart to be his last hand? The chief pyromancer. Tywin Lannister froze in place ever so slightly. Tell me. The words were utterly flat in their inflection. He had Rossart brew a lake of wildfire, Robert sighed as he leant back in his own chair and stared at the fire. And he was going to have Rossart ignite it when my army entered the capital. Probably thought that the explosion would turn him into a dragon or some such lunacy. He turned his gaze from the fire to Tywin Lannister. Your son discovered this plot and killed Aerys the moment that he gave Rossart the order to carry it out. He saved a lot of lives. The whole city, in fact. Tywin Lannister sat there and seemed to absorb that, before leaning forwards a little and running a hand over his forehead for an instant. I see, he said. Why was this not made known? Because the bloody fool did not tell anyone. Robert muttered. Fair enough, he thought it would cause a panic. Which it would. But then he kept silent about it because he thought that the wretched stuff would degrade. Tywin's eyes seemed to slam shut for an instant and then reopen. But it does not, he said after a long moment, and Ned had the feeling that he was clinging on to his self-control. Wildfire matures and strengthens with time. And also becomes more easily ignited. His voice ground to a halt. And then he seemed to come to life again. Is it still there? Word came from King's Landing this morning, by Raven, Stannis said, passing over a message scroll. It's still there. Hundreds of barrels of the stuff under the Red Keep, the Great September, the Dragon Pit, the Street of Steel and many other locations. At least 50 barrels under each gate. Lord Arin writes that they are trying to remove it with the greatest of care. The message scroll shook slightly as Tywine read it. And then he carefully handed it over to the white-faced Kevan, before asking, in a voice of deadly calm, "My son's confession, if you please, your grace." Robert handed the scroll over, and then they all watched as Tywine Lannister opened it up and started to read. As he read it, his nostrils flared once, twice, and then 3 times, and then his eyes seemed to blaze for a long moment before dulling into embers. As he came to the end, he looked, just for a fleeting moment, like an old and beaten man. Just for a flash. And then he seemed to come to life again. "I see, the Lord of the Westerlands said in a hard voice. "So my grandchildren are now hills, are they?" "They are," Robert rumbled. "It gives me no pleasure again, to say so, but they are. And I must tell you that Joffrey is in a cell. The bloody fool got drunk and decided that one way to impress you was to try and stab Ned's ear in the back with a Valyrian steel dagger. Fortunately for him, he utterly failed, as otherwise his head would have been on a spike over the bloody gatehouse. Fear not about the others, they are good children and are being treated with all due courtesy. But they are all bastards now." Tywine absorbed this with a nod and a slight wince. And then he seemed to rally a moment. "There is no doubt at all about that." "None," said Stannis in a voice that spoke of utter certainty. "They are all pure Lannister. There is not a single Baratheon trait amongst them. No black hair, no blue eyes, no second toe being longer than the first. By chance 3 of my bastards are also in Winterfell," Robert said, his eyes now hard. "And they all resemble me. Black hair, blue eyes, second toe. But Joffrey, Tommen and Myrcella, not a single trait. Not a bloody one, Tywine, not a bloody one. One I might be able to accept, but all 3. The longest pause of all followed, as Tywine Lannister seemed to have a quiet internal battle for a while as he then reread the confession. "Your Grace," he said eventually in a voice that combined many emotions, "I need to talk to my daughter." "Talk to your other son first," Robert said in a hard voice. "Because he's got something more important to tell you." "What, Your Grace?" Robert set his face into an expression of total resolve. "The others are coming for us all, and the call is true." Chapter 41. Chapter text. Tyrion. He stood there in the Godswood quietly, listening to the sound of the wind in the red leaves above him. The face carved into the trunk still intrigued him. How long ago was it carved? Who had carved it? He weighed the report he had written in both hands and then looked down at it. So many pieces of fool scrap, bound together with rough bindings on the left-hand side of it. Everything he had seen, everything he had heard, everything he had read, well, summarized at least. Would it be enough? And then he tucked the book under one arm, lifted the heavy bag with the other and stumped grimly away towards the rooms that had been set aside for father. Daisy had asked him if he wanted her to join him in this. He had kissed her hand, praised her gallantry and then told her that no, this was his battle. There was a guard at the door, a man in the standard Westerlands helm that he had never particularly liked the design of. The guard knocked on the door as he approached and then opened it at the barked "Come," from within. Father was inside, standing at the window, his hands behind his back and tension written all over the set of his shoulders. Tyrion swallowed slightly but walked in. It was then that he noticed that Uncle Kevan was sitting at the table to one side whilst in the far corner Uncle Geryon was lounging in a chair, one foot on, appropriately enough, a small footstool. "Sit." Father almost spat the word out. He sat in the nearest chair abruptly, the bag at his feet and the report on his lap. This was as bad as he had feared. Father sounded several leagues beyond merely angry. And he had every reason to be. After what felt like an age and a half, Father finally tore his gaze away from the window and wheeled around, pacing around the room and finally settling into a chair facing him. "Did you know?" He knew exactly what Father was talking of. "No." Father stared at him intently, eyes narrowed, studying his face. "Did you suspect?" "Ah. Time for the truth." "That they were doing something stupid?" "Yes." Father's hands balled into fists briefly, knuckles whitening. "Then why," he said in a tightly controlled voice, "did you not say something?" He looked Father right in the eye. "Would you have believed me?" "I had no proof." "Nothing. Just a few anecdotes about looks and glances, nothing tangible." If I had told you, you would never have believed me. You would just have called me a revolting dwarf with a disgusting imagination and then had me banished to the remotest corner of the Westerlands. Or, perhaps, the wall. Father stared at him, every muscle in his face taut, strain written all over his face, almost seeming to lean forwards, and then slowly he leant back in his chair and passed a hand over his eyes. You have a point, Father said eventually. His eyes drifted over the room and finally returned to him. No, I would not have believed you. Not without proof. The whole thing is rank madness. Whoever would have thought that this could happen? Tyrion sighed. This was a time to hold his tongue and be sober and silent. But he had to say something. Jaime left for the wall this morning. Good, Father said, his eyes blazing. When I go to the wall to see it, I will speak with him, whether he likes it or not. He needs to know what his behavior has cost his family. Father looked at him. Descendants of Lannisters yet unborn will be dealing with the aftermath of this, you realize that, don't you? He thought of the jokes, the ribald songs and the general sniggering that was probably already starting to spread across Westeros. I do, he said eventually. I do. There was a depressed silence in the room for a long moment, before Father broke it. What's that in your hand? Ah. He stood and then walked over to Father and handed his report over. You told me to go to the north and find out why Lord Eddard Stark was asking about the others. Here, Father, is my full report on all that I have experienced. Father took it with a slightly bemused look. This is not a report, this is a small book. He placed it to one side. Summarize it. Succinctly. He opened his mouth to reply, closed it as he thought very hard and very fast, and then turned to walk back to the bag. Opening it, he pulled out Rocktooth, hefted it in his hands for a moment with a sigh, and then he walked over to place it on the table next to Father. This is Rocktooth, the axe wielded by Lann the Clever. And the call is true. This thing kills whites and others in very impressive ways. This resulted in something that he had never seen before in his entire life. Father looking absolutely flabbergasted. He stared at the axe with his mouth slightly open for a long moment. Rocktooth, he said after a while. The ancestral weapon of our family. I once had Casterly Rock almost turned upside down looking for it. He nodded. It was at the Night Fort, Father. And then something occurred to him. Oh, he muttered, and then he pulled out the twin knives from his hip. And the warnings too. They glow when whites and others are near. It's a bit alarming when that happens. Father looked at the knives, the axe, at Tyrion, at the axe again, and then seemed to collect himself. Sit, he said again. And explain. So he did. He sat there and just started to talk about his trip the north, from the moment he left Lannisport, to the moment that he arrived in Winterfell for the first time. On and on he talked, recounting everything he had seen, heard of, experienced. Occasionally he pointed at the report and named a page, allowing Father to open it and peer at maps, or drawings, or particular passages. He continued on, his throat growing drier and drier, but he kept on talking until he became hoarse. This was important. Oddly enough, it was Father who poured him a goblet of wine and then gestured at him to drink and then continue. So he did, blessing the sensation of the wine going down his parched throat, and then he started to talk again. On and on he went, before he finally ended with the sad events of the past few days, and then the thing that in his mind was just as important, his proposal of marriage to Daisy. And then he fell silent with a rather defiant tilt to his head. He was bloody well going to marry her. Uncle Kevan had moved to the table not long after he had started talking, so that he could at least glance at the report. He now looked at if Casterly Rock had been dropped on his head. As for Uncle Geryon, he was smiling proudly at Tyrion, sipping from his own glass of wine. And Father? Father was staring at him with the oddest look on his face that he had ever seen. It seemed to combine a great many emotions, including astonishment, incredulity, disbelief, vague annoyance, and a slowly growing something else. I see, Father said slowly. So, to summarize your summary, since you left the Westerlands you have confirmed the fact that the Ironborn are fighting amongst themselves, confirmed that the North is preparing for a very cold and long winter as well as a war against a legendary enemy, rescued the only child of the late Torjern Shuristone, escorted her safely to her family here Winterfell, discovered that the first men used dragon glass on a hitherto unsuspected scale to fight the others and their whites, forged a good relationship with the Starks, discovered what had happened to the mountain tribes of the Vale, witnessed the old gods speaking through the mouths of a Stark not once but 3 times, ridden to the wall, witnessed a council of war between the Starks and the Lords of the North, listened to Ned Stark decide to turn his back on thousands of years of enmity between the North and the wildlings and let the latter settle in the Gift, travelled to the Night Fort and fought rogue wildlings there. Discovered not 1 but 3 heirlooms of House Lannister that had been thought lost, passed under the wall through a magic gate, helped to rescue a half-white Stark who has been wandering the haunted forest for at least hundreds of years, killed whites with Rocktooth, confronted and killed another with it as well, and finally took part in what many are referring to as Ned Stark's Great Ride South, when he moved at a speed that genuinely shocked me. Would that be a fair summation? He ran through what father had just said in his head and then nodded. Yes father. The silence that followed was the longest one of all, a long drawn-out moment of total silence as father just stared at him through narrowed eyes. And then he finally opened the report to the page with the careful line drawing of another, before doing something that utterly shocked Tyrion. He laughed. It was a soft, rueful laugh, a noise that combined amusement with bemusement and a certain amount of bewilderment. And the other 3 men in the room just stared at him in astonishment. After a moment father looked up. It seems that the gods have a sense of humor. A twisted one, but a sense of humor. It seems that the son that I wanted to succeed me has shamed the family in every way, but the son I thought was unworthy of the family name has instead shown himself to be a true Lannister. I always thought you a stunted fool. But I was wrong. You've done well. The last words looked as if they left a slightly bitter taste in his mouth. Slightly dazed at receiving praise from father, he nodded at him. Thank you father. You've also brokered yourself a marriage that I have to say is far better than anything I could have arranged for you. Lady Shuristone is the daughter of a good man. Treat her well, or I'll have something to say about it. He peered at father. You knew of him? I did. Father leant back in his chair and seemed to sigh a little. When you are Lord of Casterly Rock you will soon find that there are always people out there who will look to you to resolve disputes over land and other things. And there are always those who think that it would be clever or cunning to cite old or obscure laws or precedents in their favor. Such as the laws of the first men. Understanding blossomed. Lord Shuristone was an expert on the first men. Father nodded in what have been approval. Exactly so. He once came to Casterly Rock to ask about its history. At the time I was adjudicating a particularly messy and intractable land dispute between Lords Lefford and Brax, with the latter citing an obscure law dating from the first men, so I had little time for a northern lord. But when he heard about the dispute he approached me in private and explained the law in some detail and in full, as Brax had only referred to a part of it, giving me the full context of it that allowed me to settle things quickly and cleanly. Shuristone returned to the north after that, but ever after, especially when I was Hand of the King, I would write to him with the latest knotty little legal problem involving fools who tried to cite the laws of the first men. He sighed. His letters always had more common sense and practical wisdom than the letters of 100 lords that used to arrive. I am aggrieved that he is dead and will talk to Daisy Shuristone to pass on my sincere regrets about his passing. I'm also glad that his murderer has paid for his crime. I take it that Bootle's head is the one over the gatehouse. Eyebrows raised, Tyrion nodded. It is. Good. Father stood and then passed the report over to Kevan, who took it with a sigh. And now I have to go and see my grandchildren. I understand that Joffrey has utterly disgraced himself. He has, Geryon grimaced. Tried to knife Robb Stark in the back. Even worse, the boy didn't even have a belt knife on him. Joffrey on the other hand had a stolen dagger made from Valyrian steel. Despite that the Stark boy disarmed him and broke his nose. Oh, and one of the Wilderling girls kicked him in the balls. Father grimaced as much as he ever could. I see, he said heavily. Dishonored and disgraced indeed. Very well. And then he paused and his eyes looked almost like emeralds, so hard did they appear to be. And then I will talk to my daughter. And explain matters to her. As father strode out, Tyrion found that his goblet was being refilled. Still faintly dazed, he looked up to see that it was Uncle Geryon. What just happened? His uncle refilled his own goblet. Your father has had his world upended and shaken, and has just been forced to react. Congratulations, Tyrion. He smiled at him. Your mother would be so proud of you right now. Robb. It was interesting to see how much Sarala had improved in her archery skills in such a very short amount of time. It was enough to make him pause in his walk along the wooden causeway and stare carefully. The Dornish girl was an enigma. A dangerous enigma. She's good, said a voice to one side, and he blinked a little. Ah. Val again. He had the feeling that he had to be very cautious around her at times. He'd made bad mistakes in that previous life. She's improving fast. He tilted his head to one side and then looked at Grey Wind, who was scratching at an itch with a rear leg and closed eyes. Odd that. She hates being defenseless, Val muttered as she walked over to Grey Wind and added her fingers to scratching away the itch. Much to his surprise, the direwolf muttered with obvious pleasure, leant into her hand, almost overbalanced, and came very close to falling over. For some reason he glared at Robb as if he was to blame for that. But she's used a bow before. I think it's the arrows she's having trouble with. He looked back at the Dornish girl with narrowed eyes and then stared at the arrows she was using. And then he understood. She's using dragon glass. A heavier weight. Different balance. Needs a different way of loosing it from a bow. She wasn't used to it at first. Val looked at her. Why are people so skittish around her? He smiled and then tilted his head at Val so that they started to walk away from Sarala. Her father. Prince Oberyn Martell of Dawn. Also known as the Red Viper. And a very dangerous man. Val blinked at him for a long moment. What's a viper? Ah. He should have expected that. It's a snake, and a poisonous one at that. The Red Viper fought in Essos, and it's said that he likes to use poison on his blades. And his temper can be as hot as the land he's from. Mans told me what a snake is, Val said thoughtfully, and then she shuddered a little, making her braid swing behind her for a moment. And can Dawn really be that hot? No ice, no snow, barely any water. Well, he said cautiously, there is some water there. Otherwise there'd be no Dornish red. She nodded seriously, her mind obviously struggling with such an alien concept, and they passed down the rest of the wooden walkway in a companionable silence. At the end of it they came out at a platform, and there they found Mance Rayder. The king beyond the wall was dressed in clothes of red and black and was softly strumming on his lute. Robb wasn't entirely sure he recognized the tune, but there was something stirring in it, a hint of a greater theme. A new tune. Robb ventured. The older man looked at him for a moment, a hint of amusement in his eyes, and his mouth twitched to one side for a heartbeat. Oh, yes. A new tune. You'll hear all of it soon. It's not quite ready yet. Not quite right in places. It will be though. It will have a royal debut. Robb sat next to the former man of the Night's Watch. Have you met the king then? I have. The strumming became something a bit more harsh and martial. The demon of the trident. I had heard rumors that he had become a fat old man. That was wrong. No, he thought, remembering what he could recall of that other King Robert from the other lifetime, that was right. The call awoke something within him. And Stormbreaker. The strumming stilled completely. The sword of the Durandons. The fist of winter, Stormbreaker, this talk of other bane, the first men must have hidden them well, or had a plan, or something. They must have, Robb agreed heavily. Before the Andals came. And then the Targaryens. Val broke in crossly. In the name of the old gods, will you two cheer up? There is much that is waking up. Look at the horizon in front of you, not on the one at your back. He exchanged a look with Mance and was about to make a protest when a guard suddenly made an appearance. Lord Robb, Lord Rayder, Lady Val, Lord Stark requests your immediate attendance at his solar. Mance Rayder closed his eyes in annoyance. I am not a bloody lord, and he looked at the bewildered guard. Oh, never bloody mind. Lord Robb, lead the way please. As they trotted down the nearest flight of stairs he heard Val smirk at Mance. I thought you were to be a lord. Not just yet, Mance muttered. Lord Stark's idea. Depends on a few things and, oh, stop smirking at me, good sister. He smiled a little himself and continued on, Grey Wind leading the way. As they approached Father Solar he could see Sebaristan Selmy and Jory Castle guarding it and relaxed a little. The king is within, he said in a low voice to the two free folk. And hopefully not Lord Lannister. Many seem afraid of the man, Val said with puzzlement in her voice. Why? I will sing a song for you later, Val Mance replied. It's called The Rains of Castamere, and after I sing it I shall explain what it is about. Robb nodded at Selmy and Castle and then waited as Sebaristan knocked on the door, opened it at a muttered command from within and then held it open so that the trio could walk in. Inside they found Father and the King, as well as Lord Stannis, sitting on one side of a table whilst on the other were a particularly interesting set of people all in travel-stained clothes. Two of them were red-headed twins wearing the surcoat of the Red Wines. The third was a man in the black of the Night's Watch. And on the table was an open bag, and in the bag were large eggs. Large eggs that glittered. Robb said Father, who looked a bit strained. Come closer, all of you. Raider, we need your help on this. These three men have just arrived from Castle Black. Before then they were at Eastwatch by the sea, and before that they were at Hardham, north of the wall. Mance stepped forwards, his face pale. Is everything all right there? There was a gathering of the free folk there. The closer of the red-headed twins stood and nodded at him. Hora's red wine. I was there with Cotter Pike. Fear not, we got them all out there. All but the giants, who went south to the wall. But we went looking for cages there, the cages used to display white parts, and we found these, bones in one of the caves. And these eggs. The man of the Night's Watch nodded. John Hill, my lords. Pike sent them on to Castle Black after getting a raven from Maester Aemon. He saw them himself. And then sent us south here with them, riding hard. And the letter he wrote to his grace and Lord Stark. Maester Aemon, the king rumbled as he stared at the eggs, said that they and the bones are not from dragons. The bones were the wrong color and the eggs felt wrong. He paused, his face working with some unidentifiable emotion. I agree about the touch. Not like dragon eggs. Not quite right. And then he stood abruptly and strode over to stare moodily out of the nearest window. Father looked at the king, obviously puzzled, and then looked at Mance Raider. There are legends of ice drakes, or ice WYRMS. Legends south of the wall at least. What do the free folk know of them? There was a clunk as Mance Raider put down his lute and then walked over to stare at the eggs. Oh, there are tales all right. You said that there were bones in a cave at Hardham, lad. Hora's red wine looked a bit irked at being called lad, but nodded. The cave looked as if it had been half melted in places. Claw marks everywhere as well. It was peculiar. The Reachman shuffled his feet. I'll confess that it shook me. The fate of Hardham has always been a mystery, Mance muttered. Perhaps now we have a better idea of what happened there. As for tales of ice drakes, all I have is just that. Tales. Legends. I've never seen one. Nor have I heard of anyone seeing one. I have. It was Val who spoke. She was pale and unsettled. My father's mother once told me that she had seen something, far off in the sky, when she was once on a hunt. Northwest of the Frostfangs. It had wings and was like nothing she had ever seen in her life. It was no bird. It was too large for that. Too strange as well. There was a moment of silence and then the king stamped back over from the window. Sorry Ned, he rumbled at Father. Memories. He looked at Stannis Baratheon, who looked back with an odd look of his own. Our grandmother was a Targaryen. She gifted me her dragon egg when I was young. It's in a chest somewhere in Storm's End. Been there for years. Seeing these brought back memories. He pulled a face. Well, sighed Father. We have yet more proof of things beyond the wall. And we know now to never dismiss tales of things we think of as being impossible. Not now. There are so-called legends that are flesh and blood. He looked at the Red Wine twins. My compliments to your Lord Father, and please tell him everything that you have seen. Our thanks for coming here with these. I've ordered quarters for you to stay in. The Red Wine twins bowed at them, whilst the man of the Night's Watch nodded wearily, and then the trio left. Father leant back and sighed. And now we have a new mystery to unravel. The king nodded and seemed about to speak when there was a knock on the door that had barely closed. Yes. Robert Baratheon barked crossly. Sir Barristan Selmy opened the door, looking grave. Lord Lannister wishes to have a word, your grace. He has Joffrey Hill with him. Ah. Robb straightened and Mance Rayder looked at the king. We'd better leave, your grace. But the king shook his head. No. Stay. He flicked a finger at Robb and Val. These two stopped his attack dead in its tracks. Whatever this is about, I want them in the room. Tywin Lannister stepped into the room looking as if he was the Lord of Winterfell and nodded formally at the king. Your grace, he muttered. And then his grandson walked in, slightly stiff-legged. Joffrey Hill looked as bad as his real father had when he had sworn his oath before the Heart Tree, with dark circles under his eyes and a haggard look to his face. His eyes were bloodshot and hunted, flickering from face to face, and when he saw first him and then Val they bulged slightly and then took on a slightly mad aspect, combining horror, anger and above all fear. He looked quickly back at the door, but Frostfire was standing there, looking grimly at him, and he swallowed convulsively. Your grace, he said eventually, after getting a glare from his grandfather. Your grace, said Tywin Lannister after a moment that included a flicker of the eyes in the direction of the ice drake eggs. I am glad that so many are here to witness this. My grandson has something to say. Joffrey shambled, there could be no other word to describe it, forwards and then stared at the floor. There was a red mark on one cheek, as if something or someone had hit him there. Your grace, he said hesitantly. I am here to confess my guilt, he bared his teeth for a moment, but then saw the intensity of the glare that his grandfather was directing at him and then flinched more than a bit. My attack on Lord Robert Stark. I wish, in recompense, to take the black. The last words came out in a rush, with what sounded like no small amount of resentment behind them. The king looked at him with a great deal of contempt in his eyes and then looked at father. Lord Stark, it was your eldest son and heir that he attacked. What say you on this matter? Father swept Joffrey with an equally contemptuous look and then he rubbed his jaw in that way he had of showing that he was about to make a decision. By right and law I could take his head for what he tried to do. But he failed and has confessed his guilt. Given his family and the circumstances, I can accept his appeal to be allowed to join the Night's Watch. There was a long silence as the king stared at the boy he had thought was his son, his face more than a little red. And then he sighed and rubbed his forehead for a moment. Very well. My thanks, Lord Stark. You have been most merciful under difficult circumstances, and the crown is grateful to you. Lord Lannister, what say you? Something like a sigh might possibly have escaped the lips of Tywin Lannister, but the Lord of the Westerlands gave no other sign of his relief than a nod of the head. My thanks, your grace. Lord Stark as well. He sent yet another glare in the direction of his grandson, who once again visibly flinched before sending another hunted look at the door. Frostfire almost seemed to briefly curl a lip at him before moving to one side, and the bastard then scuttled out to join the guards who were out there. My thanks again, Tywin Lannister said. And your grace, I must go and talk to my daughter. He bowed shortly and then swept out, his face stony. It was only once the door was closed that the king spoke again. I almost pity her, he muttered. Well, almost. Cersei. Regal. She had to be regal. She was queen, no matter what that fat fool said, she had been born to be queen. And nothing could take that from her. She paced about the pathetically insultingly small room, her hands clasping each other spasmodically. Where was he? Father was in Winterfell, she knew that from the muttered comments of the guards. He should have come to her first of all, before meeting anyone else. And she knew what she would say to him, how she would persuade him that the Starks and the Baratheons were nothing more than liars, how Stannis Baratheon was playing the Game of Thrones to make himself Robert's heir. This was nothing more than a naked power play on his part, the filthy lies about she and Jaime were nonsense. Yes, she could make father believe. He had to believe her. He would never allow Robert and his curse to deprive her of her title, her rightful place. No, father would put Robert in his own place, reminding him that House Lannister was the real power behind the throne. Father was still owed a huge amount of coin by the crown, that was the reality. All the tales of that oaf Baelish's property holdings and how the debt had vanished were nothing more than lies, and childish ones at that. And once father had slapped Robert down and punished Stannis and Stark, how dare they imprison her? Perhaps it would be time for the king to have an accident, perhaps whilst hunting. Joffrey would be king. She could control him. She was sure of it. And the north would burn, from the wall to the neck. Dragonstone would burn too. She had to be regal. There was the sound of approaching boots in the corridor outside, and she turned to the door, her heart in her mouth. Was that father's voice? And then the door opened, to reveal father. He strode in, dressed all in black. She opened her mouth to speak, but the moment she looked at his face the words she had been planning died unsaid on her lips. Father's face was a frozen mask of bleakness, pale skin drawn tight over bone. Except for his eyes. His eyes blazed with one emotion. Black fury. She recognized that face. That was the face that father used when punishing people who had committed terrible crimes, and all of a sudden she felt real fear. Father closed the door, and then his hand shot forwards and pointed at the chair by her. Sit. He said the word in a voice like iron, and she hurriedly did as she had been commanded. Things were slipping out of her control, and she was about to open her mouth to speak when all of a sudden father drew a dagger from a sheath at his belt and then jabbed it, point first, into the table, before sinking into a seat of his own, his hand still curled around the handle of the weapon. There was a long moment of silence as father seemed to suppress some violent emotion, his knuckles white on the pommel, and then finally he spoke. I am now going to speak. Whilst I speak you will be silent. If at any point you make the ill-considered decision to interrupt me, you will regret it. He looked at the dagger and then at her again. Not if you understand. Suddenly terrified, she nodded choppily. All my life, father went on in a low, hard voice, I have worked with just one aim in mind. One constant goal. The restoration of our family to its proper place as the most powerful and influential house in the Westerlands, if not in all of Westeros. To that end I have done things that you cannot imagine. I have worked on a scale and at a pace that would bewilder you. I have praised fools and wise men. I have used cravens and heroes. I have killed and I have been merciful. And I had thought that all of that work had finally brought House Lannister to new heights. A new royal family. My grandson would be king after his father died. There was a creak, either from the dagger handle or father's fingers as they tightened around the handle again. But now here we sit, in this room, at this time, and everything that I have worked for lies in pieces at my feet, smashed and broken. His free hand came up from his lap and he pointed his forefinger at her. I gave you one task, just one. You were to marry Robert Baratheon, bear his children and achieve my ultimate goal of creating a Lannister-Baratheon dynasty that would outlast and outshine the Targaryens, so that if Aerys Targaryen could look up from whichever of the hells he's suffering in, he'd see what House Lannister what I had achieved and gnash his teeth in rage. Well, now. If Aerys can look up from wherever he's squatting and see me today, he'd be laughing at me. The last 3 words were snapped out in a rising half-shout that made her lean back in terror. Father never bellowed. But now he was sitting there, visibly fighting to regain his composure. After a long moment father composed himself again. Because how was I to know that you had your own plan? If, that is, such a word can be used to describe the morass of selfish, squalid filth that you have been wallowing in for years. You decided that instead of bearing the king's children you would part your legs like a whore for your own twin brother so that the pair of you could rut like a pair of mindless animals. You would then pass any resulting children off as your husbands. Father's eyes seemed to blaze with new fury as they bored into her. The fact that this was treason affecting the royal succession never seemed to have bothered you. The fact that the children wouldn't have a single Baratheon trait between them, but be pure Lannister, also never seems to have bothered you. Perhaps you hoped that no one would notice the fact that your children would not resemble your husband in any way. Well, as you might have noticed given your current location, someone noticed. He hissed the last word in a way that chilled her. Now he said, speaking in a way that made it seem as if his words were causing him physical pain, before you open your mouth and deliver a torrent of lies as you deny everything, I must first tell you that Jaime wrote out a full confession. Her heart seemed to stop for a moment in her chest. No. No, her soulmate would not have betrayed her like that. No. It was impossible. Father had to be lying. A confession that I have read. It made me want to vomit, and for the first time in my life I was almost glad that your mother is dead, because what I read would have broken her heart. The confession has been copied out, and those copies went out to King's Landing and other places days ago. There was another silence as he tightened his grip on the dagger yet again, before seeming to force himself to relax just a hair. So, what impact has your little plan had? We will get to you later. I know that you are a selfish creature, so we will look at the wider picture that would probably never otherwise occur to you. Let us start with your children. Tyrion once told me that one of your good points is that you love them. Well, your plan has certainly impacted all three of them. He leant forward slightly. They are all bastards born of incest. Those words will follow them for the rest of their lives. You might as well have branded the words on their foreheads. The glittering future that they had once is gone. They have been stripped from the succession. They are all hills. She stared at him in horror. No. They were royalty. Of course, Father continued remorselessly, the fate of some of your children is easier to predict than others. Let us start with your oldest, shall we? Joffrey. You wrote so often to me about him, praising him to the skies, telling me how clever he is, how wise, how brave and how kind. I have spent some time with him today, and now I wonder who you wrote of, because I swiftly discovered that Joffrey is a stupid, foolish, craven and cruel boy. The thought of him on the throne horrifies me. The moment he saw me he ordered me to call my banners, invade the north, rescue him, burn the north to the ground and kill every man, woman and child in it, and then take him back to King's Landing. He went on and on about it until I gave him the back of my hand and shut him up. I then took him rather firmly in hand. You might not know this, but a few days ago Joffrey got blind drunk and decided that the best was to ingratiate himself with me would be to kill Ned Stark's oldest son and heir, Robb Stark. So the damn fool tried to stab the Stark boy in the back with a stolen Valyrian steel knife, without any warning, at a time when Robb Stark was unarmed and alone. I cannot even begin to describe how foolish that was. Was Robb Stark dead? Surely the gods would have mentioned something about that. Perhaps it was a secret. Perhaps her revenge had already started. But then Father narrowed his eyes a little. He failed. Robb Stark, despite his handicaps, disarmed and defeated Joffrey. Broke his nose as well. Oh, and he was kicked in the crotch by some wilderling girl who happened to be passing. Now, normally an attack on the heir of any of the wardens of Westeros would normally have one conclusion, namely that of the attacker's severed head ending up on a spike. However, I have talked to Joffrey and then brought him before the king and Ned Stark, and the latter has agreed that Joffrey will not be executed. Instead he will take the black. He will live on the wall, he will die on the wall. Given the list of his true attributes that I listed earlier, I doubt that the period between those two things will be very long, especially given the war that is coming to the wall. Next there is Tommen. He will not go to the wall. She wanted to sob with relief. Instead he goes to the citadel. It is his choice, no one else's. The boy seems very certain about the fact that he wants to go there. My grandson will learn to shovel raven dung and one day wipe the snotty noses of the pestilential children of whatever minor lordling he is sent to be maester to. And around his neck will be the chain he will forge, and one of the links on that chain will be made of cat hair, because at the citadel he will become an expert on what he calls kitties. Are you not proud of him? Father leaned forwards again. There are small folk in the smallest part of the Westerlands who know that you do not breed cattle siblings together, as you can inbreed your way to imbecility. The Targaryens tried it, and look how they ended up, a shrieking lunatic obsessed with wildfire, whilst his sons were a fool whose obsession with prophecies ruined the dynasty, and a lunatic who tried to sacrifice his own sister in a blood magic ceremony that led to his death. Now, the Targaryens at least had a ritual that they said would protect them when brother married sister, but by the end it was a jumble of Valyrian fragments. You had nothing. Father leant back again and passed his free hand over his forehead. Now we come to Myrcella. And here I want to weep. She has, so far at least, escaped the taint of madness, or instability at least, that her other siblings have. She is beautiful, intelligent, wise, kind and above all practical. She knows exactly what you have done to her and has come to terms with it. Talking to her left me with a profound sense of sorrow. Oh, the matches I could have made for her. The heirs of great houses would have beaten a path to our doors when they discovered what she is like. A look of profound fury was directed at her. And now, nothing. She knows that her future no longer glitters, but is cloudy and dull. Knows that all too well. Her dream of marrying handsome, clever, brave Robb Stark is gone. Instead she has told me that knows that she will have to make do with whoever I can find. Her only request is that he be kind to her. I will honor that request. Silence fell in the room for a long moment. And now let us turn to Jaime, father snapped suddenly, making her jump a little. You have done something here that I could not. I have been trying and failing for years to get him out of that damn white cloak of his. Now I know why you blocked my efforts. Now he is rid of it. Alchemy indeed. But, he has merely swapped his white cloak for a black one. He will join his son on the wall, both men of the Night's Watch. Good, because he is an imbecile. I really could have gotten him out of that white cloak years ago if he had told people the true reason why he killed Aerys Targaryen. He did not do it to curry favor with Robert, oh no. He did it to stop the madman from ordering that a huge set of stockpiles of wildfire hidden under King's Landing be ignited. He saved the city, but then he didn't tell us all about it and left the foul stuff where it was. Apparently he thought that it would degrade. It does not. It matures. There's a cache under the Red Keep even now. Jaime wrote his confession after being told of all this and left for the wall first thing this morning. She found herself going pale. Wildfire. Under the Red Keep. Why had Jaime not said anything of it? And now let us turn to Tyrion, and here the irony becomes rich and thick enough to walk on. A peculiar look crossed father's face, one that combined many emotions. I sent Tyrion to the north to find out why Ned Stark was asking questions about what I thought were nothing more than legends. He succeeded. In fact, he performed far above my wildest hopes. In the time that he has been here in the north, he rescued a cousin of Ned Stark from a fate worse than death and escorted her here to her family in Winterfell. He found out just how the call was sent out. He went to the wall and discovered not one but 3 long-lost heirlooms of House Lannister there, and then he battled side by side with the Starks against wildlings, whites and others. He has not just seen one of the legendary others, he has killed one. He has, in other words, behaved like a true Lannister. Can you imagine my astonishment? Of course you can, you are staring at me like a lunatic. But the fact remains, Tyrion has been a credit to the family. You have spent years dripping poison in my ears about him. It seems that we were both as wrong about him as we could be. What might have almost been a terrible smile twisted father's face. And now see what alchemy you have wrought. Tyrion, the dwarf son I have despised for so long, is now my heir. He will inherit Casterly Rock when I die. The decision is made, the die is cast. It's Tyrion or no one. And he has made a marriage compact that will benefit us all. He will be marrying the Stark cousin that I mentioned. Daisy Shuristone is her name. I knew her father. A good man. A good match. No. 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 It could not be. Casterly Rock could not be that disgusting dwarf's inheritance. It was wrong. Wrong, beyond words. She almost reeled in her chair. No. There had to be a way around this. Perhaps, she thought of her earlier thoughts, and what father had said of Joffrey, and a solution sprang into mind. She licked her lips, turned to father and... But then father just looked at her and the words once again died unsaid on her lips. I know, father said heavily, what you are about to say. Surely father, this is wrong, Jaime should inherit, or Joffrey. Call the banners. Inflict vengeance. I see those words almost forming on your lips. And I can say only one thing in response, no. Joffrey will never succeed me, as the boy is mad. As for Jaime, again, no. He looked at her for a long moment and then seemed to sigh. You have never understood power, not really. For you it's the prospect of imminent violence that you can order on a whim. But the truth is that it's more nebulous than that at times. Varys once told me that it's a shadow on a wall. A neat turn of phrase, but wrong as well. No, power is something else. It's based on reputation. Any fool can shriek an order, but having it carried out is a different thing. You probably don't understand this, but when I destroyed the Rains and the Tarbecks in the way that I did, that was a mistake. I was young. I should have left a few of them alive, to provide an example to the Westerlands of those who cross us. The Rains of Castamere gave me a reputation of a mad dog, killing all those who crossed me. I had to work hard after that to change what the lords of the Westerlands thought of me. It took years of governing wisely, adjudicating disputes carefully and even-handedly. I had to prove myself a just and wise ruler, and then again as Hand of the King. And when I gave my word I meant it. I proved it. I made a name for myself in ruling justly. That was real power. Jaime has now sworn 3 great oaths. 1 he broke for the noblest of reasons to save King's Landing. 1 he broke for the most squalid of reasons to lay with his own sister and commit treason in the process. If he breaks the 3rd oath, if he even can and live, given what I have heard about the Fist of Winter, which he swore the oath on, then 2 things will happen. First, he will be hunted by men from all of Westeros. Second, no one will ever trust him again. His eyes searched her face and then father sighed again. The Lord of the Westerlands must be trusted to keep his word. A lord who has a justified reputation as an oath-breaker, will never be trusted. If I went north to rescue Jaime now, he would be the weakest future lord of Casterly Rock ever. Weaker than my own father. So, no. Jaime cannot succeed me. Plus he's also a fool. And if you ever think that I am ever leaving the 2 of you in the same place together ever again, you're a fool as well. She sat there, her mind a turmoil of shock and anger and confusion. After a long moment she realized that father was staring at her. And then there's you, father said flatly. The person who has inflicted more harm to our family name than anyone else in the history of our family. There are Lannisters yet unborn who will be affected by what you have done. Every Lannister girl for years to come who marries will have the babe peered at and inspected as people wonder if the child looks too Lannister. Where was the father 9 months before? And where was her brother, or her father, or her uncle? You have smeared the word incest across the family name and it will be a long time before it fades. Generations in fact. Father fell silent and just stared at her. She stared back, motionless, white-faced and terrified. I should kill you, for what you have done to us, but that would add the label of kinslayer to the Lannister family name, father said eventually. It might be cathartic though. I'm angry enough for it. But it would be too easy. That said, I cannot send you to become a Septa, or join the Silent Sisters. That would be an insult to the faith. Your former husband has told me that I must consult with him to decide your fate. And I don't know yet just what might be an appropriate punishment. He stood abruptly, pulling the dagger out of the table, and then stared at her, his nostrils flaring. Perhaps exile somewhere truly remote, a place where you cannot indulge in your squalid little lusts. I will think on it. But know this, I am beyond ashamed of you. You are a disgrace to our family. And with that he swept out. Chapter 42, Chapter 42. Chapter text. Renly. The best thing to do when talking to Lolly Stokeworth was to have a look of concerned interest and nod occasionally. That was the best way to deal with the wave of words that washed over you as she talked about everything and everyone, including just how much she disliked her older sister. A sweet girl, kind, but not one the great thinkers of the world. He made a mental note to find some Stormlord somewhere who would take this poor girl away from her family and keep her happy. There was no way in all the 7 hells that he would ever want to marry her, but she did deserve something, if only for the fact that she meant well. Eventually she came to an end and he realized that she had asked him a question, and for a moment he desperately tried to remember what that question had been. Ah. No, His Grace the King will not be returning soon to King's Landing. In fact, I believe that he will be headed to the Wall to see what the situation there is. She nodded, her eyes quite wide. He answers the call, does he not? He nodded. Mother says that the call is nonsense, but she is very strong in the faith of the 7 and I'm not sure that she really believes that it's nonsense. I heard it. He looked at her carefully. You heard the call? The nod this time was almost violent. I did. She lowered her voice as much as she could, going from a squeak to a slightly lower pitch. The others come. The Stark calls for aid. You are needed. She shuddered a little, before looking at him. I told mother about the head in the cage that I saw. She said that I was a silly girl and had been lied to and tried to slap my hands for listening to lies. I told her she was wrong. I think I'll stop talking to mother. And then she curtsied and wandered off, reminding him a little of a slightly bewildered but rather resolute puppy. As he passed on along the corridor he wondered what other younger daughters the lords and ladies of Westeros would send his way. Jon had carefully spread the word that he was looking for a wife, and as the news of the disgrace of Cersei spread there were many who were taking the opportunity to ally themselves with House Baratheon, probably out of the cold but realistic belief that if Robert dropped dead tomorrow Stannis would need a viable male heir. He winced a little as he remembered all the fine words that Loras had regaled him with in an effort to bolster the position of House Tyrell in the court. He had no doubt that ravens were now flying from Highgarden to Winterfell from Mace Tyrell, promising Robert that his daughter Margaery would make a splendid wife, whilst perhaps some other match, not a Florent of course, could be made for Renly. Wondering where Loras was at the moment was not a good idea. He missed him, but with matters the way that they were, he sighed. Boots hit floorboards ahead and he looked up from his musings to see Jon Arryn walking towards him. "Renly, are you well?" "As well as I can be after talking to Lolly Stokeworth," he sighed. "A sweet girl, but not much of a thinker." Jon looked at him with eyes that seemed to understand a great deal. "You should meet her mother," he said dryly. "And then again perhaps not. Dreadful woman. Come, walk with me. The Red Viper has returned from the Pyromancers Guild and apparently he has been talking with Pycelle and Seaworth." He raised an eyebrow. An interesting combination, he noted dryly, before matching pace to Jon's. The old man was almost back up to his old pace, which was a good sign after the attack by his wife. They trotted down the corridor, around a corner, up the short flight of rather pointless stairs and then through the doors, which a pair of silent servants opened for them. Inside they found Pycelle and Sir Davos Seaworth huddled over a set of plans on the table whilst Oberyn Martell lounged in that rather bonelessly offensive manner of his on a chair. He was holding what looked like the hood of a pyromancer and seemed to be highly amused at something. "Prince Oberyn, I take it that the Pyromancers Guild is still intact?" Jon said with a slight smile as he sat down. "What did you discuss there?" "Oh, we discussed a great many things," the Dornishman said wryly. "Including the inadvisability of trying to keep things from me and then trying to lie very badly about that." He held out a small roll of paper. "I always wondered how people like Aerion Brideflame, or Aerion the Monstrous could carry wildfire around with him in little vials and almost juggle with it. Now I know how he did it." "Vials of wildfire?" Renly said, his eyes a little wide. "I thought that was just a tale." "Oh, more than a tale," Oberyn grinned. "And he made the wildfire safe, or at least less dangerous than it would otherwise be, by adding certain powders to it that diminish its tendency to explode." He shrugged. "It makes sense. The Targaryens commissioned its creation, so they would have wanted to know everything about the substance, as the pyromancers call it." His amusement dimmed a little. "The problem is that these powders burn off or dissolve or just vanish after a while. So our mature wildfire can be tamed, but not for long." "How long exactly?" Sir Davos asked, his eyes keen. There was a pause as Oberyn Martell seemed to think about the question. "A month at the most." The commander of the Gold Cloaks exchanged a look with Pycelle. "It might be enough to get it north." He straightened up and coughed a little. "I've designed some changes to a ship's hold that might suffice. A cross-grid of wooden walls that are well braced and screwed down. If we place the barrels in them, surround them with sand on all sides and then screw a roof on the whole thing so that no sand can shift about." "It is a sound idea and it should work," Pycelle said crisply. "We need screws because it would not do to nail the boards down. Combined with Prince Oberyn's powders, we can ship it out of here to where we need it. It will need calm weather and above all crews that have been paid well and promised that if they don't come back their families will be taken care of," Sir Davos pointed out quietly. "But it can be done. Making those screws will be expensive as well." There was a pause as everyone looked at Jon, who was looking at the design that lay on the table with bright, keen eyes. "Very well, let it be done," he said eventually. "I want the wretched stuff away from here as soon as possible." Sir Davos nodded, rolled up the plans and then paused and coughed again. "Whilst you are all here, my lords, I must say that I have heard an interesting tale from an old acquaintance of mine on the docks." He said that he had seen the Bravo Sea fleet heading towards Pentos. Heading there in full force, I might add. There was a pause as they looked at the former smuggler. "Damn it, I wish that Varys was here," Jon muttered. Still no words from him. None, Renly answered gravely. He had to admit that he was wondering where the Master of Whispers was himself. But if he was in Pentos, a waggle of the hand displayed his uncertainty. A fist banged on the doors and he looked around to watch as Quill slipped in with a small scroll for Jon. As the servant left, he turned to observe Jon, who seemed to be struggling with something. "A raven from Old Town," Jon said slowly after a while. "Mace Tyrell is dead." He looked up quickly. "Dead? How?" But there was no quick answer from Jon, who was reading the message again and then rereading it. "Your pardon, my lords and sirs, this is all most odd. Apparently the old Lord Tyrell died after rescuing a Septon who tried to cleanse a gate of some kind in the lowest level of the high tower itself. The gate killed the Septon and eventually Lord Mace Tyrell." He lowered the message and then tossed it onto the table. It was Oberyn Martell who picked the message up. "The lowest level of the high tower. The level built of black oily stone built by some unknown people." "The same," Jon replied. "Lord Willers Tyrell is the new Lord Paramount of the Reach." He thought of Loras instantly and he wished he could comfort him in his grief. "My young friend Willers will be a far better Lord of the Reach than his father, although I always wondered if old Mace was a bit more wily than most people thought he was." Oberyn mulled, making Renly frown a moment in thought. There was a tapping noise as he flicked a fingernail repeatedly against the scroll as he seemed to think very hard. "This gate though, what could kill a man? This is almost odd." He thought, for a long treacherous moment, about volunteering to go to Old Town to investigate this. But then he caught a flicker of the eyes from Jon and he realized that that would be selfish of him. No. He needed to stay here. He had his duty to House Baratheon to carry out. Daenerys. Bolt Hole had a bath, a large one, and people to heat water almost to boiling point, and so she had spent that first evening bathing and scrubbing the filth of the road off her, whilst her dragons had watched from a perch, obviously confused as to what she was doing. And then she had slept in a very comfortable bed for quite a long time, a long and dreamless sleep. And Bolt Hole itself was interesting. It was more than a farmhouse. It was larger than she had thought at first, and luxuriously appointed in many places. The dead Magister had planned well for any future exile here, with a large number of quite luxurious furnishings. There was something else though, it was quiet here. The servants came and went, the guards patrolled the area, but above all the background noise of a city was gone. She wasn't sure if she liked it or not. Not just yet anyway. And all around them the rolling hills and valleys of Andalos. With the odd lump and bump of a ruin. She could see one now on the horizon and she shuddered a little. There was a polite tap at the door and she turned from looking out of the window to see a servant. It was Tyrese, who unnerved her sometimes by staring at her as if she was either holy or bizarre. She could never properly describe the look. "My lady, Lord Varys would like to see you in his solar, if you please." She nodded, looked at where her dragons were sunning themselves in the sun to one side, and then strode out into the corridor. Varys's solar had previously been the Magister's and there was a fresco outside it that showed Mapatis as he had been when he had been younger and less, well, fat. As she approached, a travel-stained man in dark clothing stepped out of the room. He looked weary and he walked off without so much as a look in her direction. As she entered the solar she could see that Lord Varys was sitting at a large desk. He was staring at a letter on the desk in front of him as if it had personally offended him. After a moment he seemed to notice that she was there and stood up to beckon her over. "1,000 pardons, my dear, but I have just had some rather odd news. It's a good thing that you're here, as it involves your family. I have a letter here from your great-great-grand-uncle, if I have the relationship right." She smiled slightly as she sat. "More or less. May I read it?" Varys hesitated for a moment and then picked it up. "It's written in his handwriting." He said the words in an odd voice. She stared at him, confused. "How can that be? He's blind." The eunuch shot her a quick look, eyes flickering at her. "He was. The man who brought his letter here was at Castle Black when the Lords of the North arrived. When Ned Stark especially arrived." She frowned. "Why Ned Stark especially?" Varys straightened up and looked at her. Because when Lord Stark looked at Maester Aemon his eyes blazed with red fire and he spoke with the voice of the old gods as he restored the vision of Aemon Targaryen. That's what the courier said at least. He owed me a favor and I see no reason why he would lie on the matter. Not when another of my little birds confirmed it, and above all there is the letter, addressed to you in Maester Aemon's hand. All, most peculiar. They stared at each other for that long moment of mutual confusion. The old gods. She asked the question hesitantly. Truly. It would seem so, Varys answered as he sat as well. But then they have been making their presence felt in all kinds of places of late. It's been almost confusing. Now, I am a little behind the news at the moment. When I am at King's Landing my little birds bring me their songs directly. My time in Essos has, however, meant that I am trying to catch up as I start to hear their songs again. And then the plump man looked, just for a moment, almost haggard. But one thing I have witnessed with my own two eyes is the reason why Ned Stark summoned the Lords of the North to Castle Black. It was the reason behind the call. For some weeks now men of the Night's Watch have been going south with cages made of some unknown metal. I saw one, no, two in King's Landing. Both contained the severed heads of what had once been human beings. But human beings die when you cut their heads off. These, well, their eyes opened and closed and followed you about the room and the mouths tried to bite all who came near them. Tell me, my dear, are you familiar with the northern tales of wights? Because that's what was in those cages. The heads of wights. She just stared at the man as if he was mad. But wights are nothing more than a northern myth, she said, bewildered. Viserys told me that. Your brother might not have been that well informed, Varys sighed. Although I will confess that I thought the same thing. A northern legend, nothing more. But once you've seen one of those cages, he leant back in his chair and passed a hand over his forehead before looking at her and smiling wryly. A mirish toy, I thought at first. A trick, a device, a thing of wires and plaster. But it was not. Nor was the next one. They were real. And if wights are real, then what of the others? They animate the dead, or so say the tales, but what if the tales are based on reality? She looked at him and then shook her head in amazement. And then she looked at the letter again. The hand that had written her name was a little spidery, but it was clear. She picked it up slowly and then tucked it away in a pocket. Now was not a time to read it, and by the slightly sidelong glance that Varys sent in her direction that was the right thing to do. She still didn't trust him, not truly. After a moment he looked at her again. I must be away again tomorrow, I am afraid. You can rely on the people here, and there is a great deal of food both stored and on its way here, by several careful ways. This place is safe for the time being. However, I have been away from my duties in King's Landing for too long, and I must return there if I am to continue to straddle so very many different lines. His eyes flickered at her face and then at the walls and then back at her. You must consider carefully what you want to do next, my lady. Bolt Hole is but a pause, a place to gather your strength and to consider where you wish to fly to next. You are a dragon, never doubt that, and fire and blood are the words of your family. But fire and blood at the moment can only take you so far before they burn any branch you are perched upon. Your family name is not popular, and I know, you are not your father. However. He was interrupted by an urgent knock on the door. Come. A servant scurried in with a message that she deposited on the desk hurriedly, curtsied, and then left. Varys scowled at it for a moment and then he seemed to pale a little. It's marked urgent and important, he muttered as he picked it up and opened it. Please pardon me, my dear. As he read it she looked around the room curiously. There were a lot of shelves, some empty, some filled with scrolls, or what looked like rolled up maps, or small caskets. And then she heard a muttered curse, a gasp, and then the scrape of a chair. When she looked back, Varys was standing and staring at the message in a combination of astonishment and disbelief. Are you well, Lord Varys? He looked at her slightly wild-eyed, before recovering as his arms retreated up his sleeves in that familiar poise of his. I do beg your pardon, my dear. Today has been a day of all kinds of surprises. He sat again and then twitched a small smile in her direction. News from King's Landing, or rather from Winterfell. It seems that King Robert has lost both his wife and his children, in that he has dissolved his marriage and denounced his children as bastards. The reason for this abrupt act is that Cersei Lannister, as she is once again, was discovered having, intimate relations with her own brother, the Kingslayer, and that the king's children are in fact her brothers. Incest and treason. Not a good combination. She looked at him, her eyebrows raised. She had no sympathy whatsoever for the usurper, but she felt some surprise at what had happened. Incest was a tricky subject given the history of her family. At one point Viserys had mulled over marrying her himself, only to change his mind when the Dothraki match had come up. Finally she asked, what happened to the Kingslayer then? Is he dead? Taken the Black and going to the war? But he confessed to something, the true reason why he killed your father. She leant back in her chair for a moment, surprised, as 100 memories of her brother's rants about the perfidy of the Lannisters returned to her. The real reason. Surely he killed father on orders from his own father. Father's old spymaster looked at her carefully, eyes flickering. I fear not. He paused and seemed to hesitate for a long moment. In his last days your father fell into a black and terrible mood. He saw enemies behind every pillar, in every shadow. He was paranoid. His last 2 hands were, interesting. Lord Chelstead died in odd circumstances, dipped by your father in wildfire and then burnt alive. I never found out why, save that he had discovered something that your father had been working on. When I started to investigate, your father warned me not to, on pain of death. Death by wildfire to be precise. His last hand was a man called Rossart, who was the head of the Pyromancers Guild. An odd man, prone to giggling and getting excited when he discussed wildfire. Many wondered why at the time. Now we know why. Jaime Lannister discovered the same thing that Carlton Chelstead had, the thing that your father had been working on. The eunuch looked at her with strange expression on his face, a combination of horror and fascination. A feeling of deep unease stole over her, as she wondered what it was that her father had indeed been up to. Lord Varys, please tell me what happened. Varys pursed his lips for a moment as he seemed to consider his words carefully. It seems that your father ordered the pyromancers to bury caches of wildfire all over King's Landing, he said with a brutal candor. Under the Dragon Pit, under the Great September, under all the gates, under places like the Street of Steel and, under the Red Keep. Enough to destroy the city. It seems that your father thought that he could become a dragon when it was all ignited when the rebel army approached. Jaime Lannister stopped him from giving that order. Time seemed to stop as ice water seemed to flow through her veins for a long moment. No. No, that was impossible. Father had, from all accounts, been unstable, but to do that, or at least prepare for it. No. Something of her jumbled thoughts seemed to show on her face, because Varys sighed, looked at the message again and then looked back at her. You weren't there, he said heavily. In those last days. You were not yet born. You did not see the look on your father's face after the news of the Battle of the Bells, or after the Ruby Ford. Or, indeed, as the reports came in of the rapid advance of the rebel vanguard, led by Lord Stark. Confusion, despair, anger, madness. In his last days your father plumbed new depths. I was there to see it. But, she struggled with the words that would not come from her mouth. To order the destruction of the city, that would be beyond madness. Viserys told me that. Your brother was blinded by his loyalty to your father and his hate for the Lannisters. And he was too young, Varys broke in almost gently. Too young to understand what was happening. And, the day that Chelstead died, your father mistreated your mother in a most shocking way. Her screams, he broke off and stared at the nearest window, before finally looking back. Your pardon, my dear. This changes a few things. There was the sound of drumming fingers as he sat there at the desk. You can stay here as long as you like. As word spreads of what your father tried to do, well, the reputation of House Targaryen will fall still further. You have a great deal of thinking to do. Even with the backing of 3 dragons, many will not follow you based on what your father tried to do. This narrows the possibilities open to you still further from earlier limitations. If you need a home for the foreseeable future, then this is it for the time being, if you so choose. She thought of the house with the red door for a moment and then smiled with no small amount of bitterness. Lord Varys, I thank you for your hospitality. However, the idea of home is an alien one to me. We were chased from place to place by the usurper's assassins, so I do not know what home even means. Her words brought her an odd look from Varys. Assassins? Yes, she said wearily. Viserys always had us moving from place to place, a step ahead of Robert Baratheon's killers. The bald man stared at her again. Your pardon, my dear, but no assassins were ever sent after you. Spies, yes, to keep an eye on you, but assassins? No. Not to my knowledge. She looked at him in puzzlement for a long moment. No. Viserys had told her about the assassins, many times. But that was what he told me. Varys sighed and ran a hand over his face for a moment. Oh dear. The hand went back to the desk and drummed some more for a moment. I need to return to King's Landing, he said after a long moment. As I have been away for too long. There are certain proprieties that I must observe. His face hardened for a moment. I also need to deal with 2 pieces on a now defunct board of the Game of Thrones. She stared at him, suddenly feeling afraid. When will you return? I do now know, but rest assured that I shall. He looked at her most carefully. Enjoy the quiet. Raise your dragons. Read Maester Aemon's letter. I will leave instructions for the servants to obey you. And think on your future. It might be that House Targaryen is merely a smaller player on the board than some might have thought. But you are alive and able to think about such things. And with that he stood up, gathered his papers, bowed to her a little and strode out. Theon. The evening meal in the great hall that night was subdued, almost. It was not loud, it was not boisterous in any way, it was just quiet. The king was at the head of the table, next to his brother Lord Stannis and his all-but brother Lord Stark, and they talked quietly but intently, gesturing at a small map of the realm on the table. There was a moment of sudden silence to one side and he looked over to see that Tywin Lannister had arrived, his brothers next to him and a faint air of tension over them. The silence deepened for a moment and then everyone resumed what they were doing at a slightly louder volume. He suppressed a smirk. It was not a good idea to smirk anywhere near a Lannister right now. Tywin Lannister strode to the empty chair at the head table that had been set aside for him, bowed shortly to the king, who nodded back at him, and then sat and speared some meat off a platter that a servant had hurried to bring to him. He then ate, staring at the table with what looked like unseeing eyes. Theon watched him carefully and then looked at the other Lannisters, who were eating and glancing at the head of their house worriedly. And then after a long moment the king looked down the table. Lord Lannister, we need your counsel on the matter of mobilizing the realm, especially over the issue of how and when to man the wall. I would be grateful to know your thoughts on this. He frowned for a moment and then watched as Tywin Lannister chewed, took a swallow of wine and then leant closer to the map on the table and joined the low-voiced conversation. Theon couldn't hear that much of what he said, but occasionally a word could be heard, such as harvest, stockpile and then night's watch. After a while they all resumed eating and drinking, although every now and then one of them would lean towards the others and say something. He sighed a little. Robb had gone to bed earlier, tired, and Jon was off somewhere in a hunt for the terrible threesome, who had apparently been hatching some kind of plan to search the crypts for the legendary dragon egg of Vermux. Exactly how a large dragon had gotten into the crypts seemed to have escaped them, but apparently they had a plan to look for it. Once he finished his food he stood, nodded at those around him and then walked out of the hall and looked up at the stars above him. Those same stars shone above Pike. And also the stony shore. He'd been thinking about the latter a lot this past day. There were a few old abandoned keeps here and there, but he'd been looking at the maps and he thought that he might have spotted a few good anchorages here and there. A keep, a potential port, land to till, a holding to protect, there were possibilities. Well now, look at him. A lord, thinking of the duties of a lord. He just needed men and a wife, and that latter thought made him think of Ros. Should he pay a visit to Wintertown and the brothel where she was? Too late tonight perhaps. Or was it? He liked her and he was pretty sure that she liked him. She seemed to, anyway. It was hard to tell with Hawes. And then he heard a crunch of boots approaching, followed by the clearing of a throat and he sighed a little and turned. His sister was standing there, a mug of ale in her hand. I was wondering when you'd seek me out, sister. I had a lot to think about, she said, before bringing her other hand out from behind her back and handing him another mug of ale. "Here you go. I don't like to drink alone." He took it and quaffed, before wiping his mouth. "Not bad. You want to talk about what I've done?" "I do." She seemed to struggle for a moment for words, before deflating a little and then waving him over to one side, where there was a barrel with a spigot hammered into it. "Ah. More ale. You're a Greenlander now." "I am. Lord Greymist." "That I am. Father won't be pleased." He scowled at her. "Father can fuck off." She glared at him and he threw the remains of the ale down his throat and then poured himself another one. "Oh, stop that. When did Father make the decision to rebuild the Iron Fleet after Pike fell and I became a hostage? A day? A week? A heartbeat? I could have been put to death at any time if word had gotten out. Did Father ever think of me?" Her scowl withered a little as he stared at her and then her eyes flickered down away from his. "He had his duty to our people." "Your people?" "I'm not Ironborn now. I'm of the North. Because of Ned Stark. He was a true father to me. Didn't scowl at me or hit me for playing anywhere near him. Didn't shout at me for asking what was happening. I respect him." He stared back up at the stars. "I never respected Father. And now I'm not a hostage anymore. I'm Lord Greymist. I'll have a hold fast in the West and I'll do my best to protect my people. As a lord should." She studied him carefully. "And you worship the old gods?" It was not a question, it was a statement. "I do." "You mentioned the drowned god. And that, you'd seen him." He looked at her bleakly and then he told her all about the 2 dreams he had had. Every part of them. By the time he finished speaking her eyes were very wide and she was pale and shaking. She peered at the weirwood medallion around his neck and then she refilled her mug, quaffed it in a long series of swallows and then refilled it again. "Gods," she said eventually. "No wonder you worship the old gods. I don't want to think about what would have happened if I'd met him. The drowned god. Gone mad. Become a second Damfair." She shuddered. "Be glad you haven't seen Damfair in years. He's older and madder than ever. He'll be there at the parley. I'm looking forwards to seeing his face when he sees that Stannis Baratheon, the Hand of the King, is there." He nodded. "I've been thinking about that. I might be there with him. Father needs to know what I've done. What the king has declared. That you're his heir now. And that I deny the drowned god." She peered at him. "Are you drunk, brother?" "Not as drunk as you. Spitting in Father's face from Winterfell is bad enough. Being right there and then when you do it has to be done," he said hoarsely. He'd been thinking about this a lot. The king's announcement about his name and future was already spreading. "Father can't pressure me into anything. I'm from the North now, the decision is made and the king has announced it. I'm Lord Greymist and Father can't change that. And with you his sole heir that might force him to make peace a bit quicker." Asha stared at him for a long moment, as if she wasn't sure what he was. "Are you serious about this?" "I am." He stared back at her. "And I was in the room where the call was sent out. I heard it. That's more important than Father and his fucking dreams of independence." His sister quaffed some more ale as she looked at him. "Nuncle Roderick will be welcome that." "All right. Fair enough." She nodded at him. He nodded back and then strode away. Damn it. He needed Robb. When morning came he decided that it was a day for a shave. There were times when it felt odd to feel how smooth his chin was, compared to the short beard that he'd had once, in that other, terrible time. There were times when he almost wanted to just forget every memory he had of that other, terrible, time. But he couldn't. He had made mistakes then, bad ones, and he had to remember them if he was to stand any chance of learning from them. Such as the memories of his wife, and what she had cost him. He couldn't be that stupid again, putting his own wishes ahead of his duties. But, he thrust that thought aside. No. That would be a bad idea. He finished shaving, ran a hand over his chin, and then finished dressing, pulling on a linen shirt and a leather jerkin, before sticking a knife in his right boot and a dagger in his belt on his left side. Joffrey Hill may be in a cell, awaiting an escort to the wall, but he had no intention of ever being caught without a weapon ever again. Or, come to that, Grey Wind. His direwolf had barely left his side since the attack. He wondered sometimes what had happened to Grey Wind in that other time. He had a bad feeling that he would not have survived for long. That made him wince, and he looked at Grey Wind, who was staring very intently back at him. Then he smiled and reached out to scratch the fur just under the direwolf's chin. As they both wandered out into the main courtyard, he could see that the king was already limbering up with that log of his at his feet. He smiled a little. The difference between the king of his previous life and the king he was looking at now was brutally clear. If he hadn't seen it for himself, he wouldn't have believed it. Jon was sitting at the seat he'd taken to sitting at since his legitimization, sniffing at what looked like a freshly made bread roll. There were more of them to one side, and he grabbed one and then peered at the little wooden tub filled with fresh butter, before grinning, ripping open the roll and then using his belt knife to transfer some butter on it. "I hope that knife's clean," Jon groused in a good-humored manner. "You haven't been cutting up anything for Grey Wind's morning meal, have you?" "Oh, just some old rancid beef bones," he replied, before laughing at Jon's face. "It's clean." The roll was still warm and the butter had melted quickly. It was delicious, and he quickly grabbed another, before looking around for more food. "You're hungry?" Jon asked. "Starving," he mumbled through a mouthful of bread and butter. "Too much running about yesterday." A servant placed a platter of meat to one side and he snagged a piece of ham with his knife. "Tension, too." He looked about for a moment and then lowered his voice. Tywin Lannister apparently had a word with his daughter. He took a knife into the room with him. "Didn't use it on her, but I heard that she was as pale as a ghost afterwards." Jon looked at him and snagged his own piece of ham from the platter, something that made Ghost's head suddenly appear from under the table with a look that spoke of the utmost optimism. Jon looked at his direwolf with what was supposed to be a quelling look, before grabbing another piece, ripping it in two and then tossing one to Grey Wind and the other to Ghost, both of whom snapped them down with almost identical snaps and gulps. He blinked slightly as he felt something like happiness prickle around the edges of his mind, followed by a certain wistful hope, and he looked at Grey Wind carefully. The direwolf looked back and he smiled slightly. "Arya wants to give us lessons," he muttered. "Warging lessons. But there are times when I almost know what your direwolf is thinking." "I've felt the same, Robb. It's a strange feeling, isn't it?" He nodded thoughtfully. Wargs. They not only existed, but he was one himself. They all were, the children real and apparent of Ned Stark. He had wondered how long it had been since that had happened with the Starks, and had mentioned it to Lewyn, who had frowned and then muttered something about consulting the books. They had already been able to make use of Arya and Bran's warging abilities, but he could already think of a dozen ways of making use of warging on a battlefield. There were drawbacks as well. What happened if your direwolf died whilst you were in his or her mind? But he could use this. Or rather, he could have in a conventional war. That wasn't what they were facing now. He'd have to learn new tactics and develop new strategies. Teach them too. Jon's skills on that front were lacking. Breakfast soon ended, and as they wandered out into the courtyard he looked around. To one side he could see various servants pulling out straw targets for the archers amongst them, and he wondered if Sarilla would be there soon. Doubtless she would. It would be a brave man who married that one. And then there would also soon be the free folk. His thoughts skittered away from one of them. No. The other one, however. No sign of the grit this morning. He asked the question lightly but grinned a little when Jon's posture stiffened. "That one likes you. She's fierce. I like her too." "Oh, stop smirking like that, Robb." His brother looked somber. "There'll be those who say that she's unworthy of even a legitimized bastard." He nodded. "Aye, those who play the Game of Thrones. The thing is that we're not playing that anymore. Not for a while. Survival first. Oh, I know, there will always need to be alliances between families, but you're not an important piece on the board." Jon pulled a face. "I don't want to be. I want to be overlooked. I'm going to be your bannerman, Robb, just like Theon." Brother and bannerman Robb corrected him. Never forget that. John said with a small smile. I'll never forget that. A look of sympathy crossed his face. At least I can marry who I want. What of you? Robb looked about carefully. No one was near. I tried that once. It didn't end well. He shrugged. I'm father's heir. Survival or not, who I marry is important. Father might say otherwise, but I know that there will be implications. John sent a sympathetic look his way, and he was halfway through another shrug when he heard a horn blow from beyond the nearest gateway. High and clear, brassy and somehow ancient. And everyone who heard it stared at the gateway. What was that? John asked. Shouts came from the gateway, and after a long moment a guard emerged from a stairwell, caught sight of them and then all but ran to them. My lords, he panted. A party is at the gates, with a banner that no one has ever seen before. A white tree with red leaves on a green background. That was the banner of. He paused and searched his brain furiously. He had not the faintest idea whose banner that was. But a weirwood tree was of the north. How large a party? About 30 strong, my lord. Admit them. But watch them. My lord. The man ran off, and after a short time the gates creaked open to admit the party. They were all wearing green cloaks, and as he saw them enter Winterfell he opened his eyes at one of the leading riders. Uncle Brynden. His shout stilled the courtyard as he looked at the man with the salt and peppered hair, although was there less salt than he remembered. Robb. The Blackfish said warmly as he dismounted and then tossed his reins to a groom, before striding over to him, his eyes keen. Which was confusing. It had been years since Great Uncle Brynden had met him, in his time at least. How did he know him now? Great Uncle Brynden. They embraced, slapping each other's backs, before stepping apart again. We need to talk, the Blackfish muttered, looking about the place and then staring at Grey Wind. Especially with your father. And you need to meet some people. He turned to the others in his party who were dismounting behind him. Brian of Tarth and the Green Man. Robb froze. Brian of Tarth. Mother had known her in that other time, and he looked over to see a tall blonde woman approach. And behind her was an old man, and old tall man with an air of authority, who wore a green cloak with a hood that had horns on it. But, the banner, the horns, the title. So you are the boy who died and fell through time, the old man said softly as he loomed over him. There is a lot we must talk about. He stared at the Green Man and then at Uncle Brynden. Oh yes. We need to talk. Cresson. He closed the large book, drummed his fingers on the cover for a long moment and then sighed and picked it up so that he could return it to the bookshelf. As he returned to his desk he glanced out of the window and stopped to brood. They had finally stopped searching for Patchfis. Instead the fisherfolk had been told to keep an eye out for the body, but by now there wouldn't be much left. Not after the waves, the rocks, the crabs and everything else. He just wished that he could have talked to the man for longer on the terrible night when he had died. Something had touched the man. The more he thought back at what he had once thought was nothing more than the babblings of a madman, what if he hadn't been? What if he had been a seer, someone who prophesied the future? He'd almost died in Shipbreaker Bay that day, he'd trailed his coat under the nose of the stranger, what if something had marked him somehow? Which raised the question of who? And how? And that part made him shiver a little. Anyway, he'd ordered that people who had known the fool write down or tell others who could write, about what Patchfis had said, no matter how trivial some might think it had been. There was probably nothing in it, but you never knew. He returned to his desk and continued to brood there. There was no mention in any of the histories anywhere in Dragonstone or King's Landing or in the Citadel apparently of the Godswood here on the island. The Andals had not known about it, let alone the Valyrians and Targaryens. So that meant that it must have been hidden a very long time ago. Long enough that there had never been even a whiff of rumor about it. Which was a good thing, given the nature of some of the Targaryen kings, like Baelor the Blessed, or as he liked to refer to him in the privacy of his head, Baelor the Cracked. Someone as holy as that king would have ordered the Godswood destroyed. Fortunately it hadn't been destroyed and had survived so that Shireen and Gendry could discover it. He twiddled his thumbs a bit over that. He disliked the odds of such a chance. He had a nagging feeling of unease, as if someone was looking over his shoulder. The grave in the Godswood had been that of a green man, they knew that much from the runes. They were rumored to be able to dream of the future. That made him shudder. Was that why he felt so uneasy, because a man had dreamt of Shireen and Gendry thousands of years ago? Voices outside made him look up, and after a moment a knock was delivered on the door. "Maester Cresson. It's Valmond. Come in." As the blonde-haired man, who had a large drop of Dragaseed blood in him, scurried in, Cresson stood. There's something about the look on his face. "What has happened?" "We found something," Valmond panted. "You told us to locate all the seams of dragon glass on the island. There was one we knew of down by the strand, in the cliff there. There's paintings on the rock. Old ones. Very old ones." He blinked and then hurried for the door. "Show me." It was a long way down to the strand, and the wind was blowing hard enough that his robes clung to his legs and almost made him stumble once or twice, but he barely noticed. There was a group of men standing at the entrance to the cleft in the cliff, and they made way for him, one of them handing him a torch. Valmond had one too, and he led the way into the bowels of the cliff. Yes, there was dragon glass here, a lot of it. There were marks here and there as if someone had mined part of it, and he wondered who and when. And then they passed through into another area beyond that, which contained a lantern that someone had left there. He stopped dead when he caught sight of the paintings. They were everywhere. Swirls and swirls of paint. Patterns that made his head hurt for a moment. Handprints here and there, and he peered at some of them. Yes, some had 4 fingers and a thumb, but others were smaller. And had the wrong number of fingers. And what might have been claws. "The children of the forest were here," he muttered, his mouth dry with shock. "Here with the first men." He turned back to the other paintings. Yes. There were images of men and children of the forest, meeting. Shaking hands. There were runes under some of the images, and he frowned at them. Some seemed to be in the language of the first men, but others. "Maester Cresson." Valmond was drawing his attention to another painting. And as he looked at it, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up on end. White and blue paint had been used to paint this one. The images were of almost ethereal things, figures with white flowing hair and hands that seemed to. He blinked. There was a glow about their hands, and to one side there were other figures that looked like corpses of men. Standing corpses. Whites perhaps. He turned on the spot, looking at all the paintings around him. And then he looked at Valmond. "You did well to bring this place to my attention. The paintings are important. They are not to be touched. Bring me my box of colored inks from my study, all the fool scrap paper you can find, and as many quills you can get your hands on. We must copy this. And I must write a long report for the Citadel on this. And write a book to add to the collection on Dragonstone," he thought. Those runes. They meant something. Barristan. He had always thought that the moment that had heralded the beginning of the end of Aerys Targaryen's rule had been the moment that Tywin Lannister had thrown the pin shaped like a hand at the feet of the Iron Throne and then turned on his heel and strode out, ignoring the combination of insults and cackles and mumbled orders that had come from the mouth of the Mad King. At that moment Aerys had lost the services of one of the most knowledgeable, ruthless and above all capable men in all of the 7 kingdoms. The one man who might have been able to stop the long slow snowballing of disaster that had led to the virtual destruction of the Targaryen dynasty. He was reminded of that now as he listened to Lord Lannister as they stood in Lord Stark's solar. The Lord of the Westerlands was stating quietly but intently just what he would do in terms of supporting the war that was to come on the wall. He spoke of moving supplies to the wall, of sending building materials to the castles. He asked the Lord Commander about which castles needed the most work and which the least. He spoke of preserving food for the long winter that was to come, of mining coal, laying down stocks of firewood, expanding the fishing fleet and of forging weapons. He spoke nothing but common sense and practicality. It was as if the years had rolled back and he had been Hand of the King. The current Hand of the King had been sitting to one side, taking copious notes on paper and only occasionally grinding his teeth. Occasionally he would look askance at Lord Lannister, as if he was pondering what exactly he was. The others also sat and listened. Lord Stark next to the great map, the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch at his side, and over to his left his Grace the King, a great brooding presence, blue eyes flickering between the map and Lord Lannister. Occasionally one of them would vouchsafe a fact in answer to a question, or answer a question asked. And then Lord Stark pulled out the head of a spear with tines at its base from a bag by the desk. "For fighting whites," he said quietly. "The men will have to be trained in its use. They'll be too used to fighting live men who collapse and die once you deliver a killing blow. Whites don't do that." Lord Lannister took the spearhead, inspected it carefully and then nodded. "Practical," he said eventually. "And easily replicated. With your permission, Lord Stark, I'll have this sent south, to the foundries of the Westerlands. The Reach should know of it too. We will need what they have." He looked at the king. "What are your immediate plans, Your Grace?" The king leant forward slightly, his eyes going from the map to them. "I need to spy out the lay of the land. This war that is coming will be fought at the wall, so I need to see it. Lord Commander Mormont, I'll be returning to the wall with you. The hand of the king will going to the Iron Islands to stamp out the bloody civil war that seems to have started there after the call was sent out. And I believe that Lord Stark is headed down to Barrowton." "I," said Lord Stark quietly. "There have been odd tales of fog on the Barrows there. It might be connected to the call." He shook his head. "There's a lot about it that I suspect we do not know." The king echoed. His fingers drummed briefly on the table and then he seemed to collect himself. "My lords, Sir Barristan, I need your help on a matter of the utmost importance. We have all seen what war can be like, and we all know how fickle the stranger or the old god equivalent can be at times when choosing men to die. We've all seen men stumble, so the arrow meant for them takes the man behind instead. We've all seen men who looked hale and hearty at sunset, but who were dead of camp fever at dawn the next day. We are going to war against an enemy that no one has fought for thousands of years, and there is much we don't know and can't therefore plan for. So, one thing must be settled: the succession. If I die tomorrow, then my brother Stannis will be king, and I have to say here and now that he would be a good and strong king." He clapped a hand on his brother's shoulder, who winced just a little but who looked as content as Stannis Baratheon ever did. "But and it grieves me to say this, I'd be a fool if I admitted that as his current heir is his daughter Shireen, there would not then be a problem. Shireen's clever and wise and no longer scarred by the grayscale thanks to the old gods. But there will be fools out there who claim that we cannot have a queen, the descendants of the fools who started the Dance of Dragons. And there will also be fools who claim that I am not a strong king because I do not have an heir born of my loins." The faces of Stannis Baratheon and Tywin Lannister both tightened for a moment, before they both sighed and then nodded a little most reluctantly. "As I see it, therefore, I have three choices. One is to marry again and produce children. But there's no guarantee that she'd be fertile, there'd be a 9-month wait at least for a child, and even then what if it's a girl? The second is do nothing, other than to confirm Stannis as my heir, which he is. Lady Sliss is pregnant again and she might bear him a boy. But, again, there's no guarantee of that, and if she bears him a girl, that makes Shireen his heir, leading to the problem with fools that I mentioned. And the third choice is for me to legitimize some, not all. I'm not Aegon the Bloody unworthy of my bastards. Naturally there's a problem with that as well, in that only one of them, Edric, has noble blood. And Edric's too young to be king, there'd have to be a regency. Gendry's a better age, but he has no noble blood and he's a blacksmith." The king sighed and then leant back in his chair. "Ned, you are my oldest and dearest friend, as well as the Lord of the North. Stannis, you are my hand, and also my brother. Lord Lannister, you were hand of the king for many years. Lord Mormont, you were once a major lord in the north and now you are the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. And Sir Barristan, you have served on the King's Guard for decades and been on the Small Council for years. Advise me, all of you. The realm is about to go to war and who knows what will come." There was a long silence in the room as every man in it seemed to collect their thoughts intently. But it was Lord Lannister, who looked his age for a long moment and then leant forwards. "Your Grace, I understand your predicament. I would suggest a combination of those three options would be the prudent course of action. As you said, we will soon be in a war the like of which we have not seen for centuries. It would behove all the ruling families of Westeros to strengthen themselves by adding to their numbers. Yes, confirm Lord Stannis Baratheon as your heir. That would set the succession in stone for the time being. But also look to marry again. Winter is not yet here and with it the others will come, so we presumably have some time. As you prepare the realm for war, consider the marriage proposals that are doubtless on their way as the news spreads of my daughter's disgrace. His voice hardened for a moment on that last word. Then he cleared his throat and continued. As for your bastards here in Winterfell, I suggest that you legitimize them, or at least consider the matter carefully. Watch them for their potential, the boys at least. And then Lord Lannister sighed wryly. It has been made clear to me of late that there are times when potential can be right under your nose, but that sometimes you overlook it for various reasons. The king looked confused for a moment, but then Lord Stark mouthed the words "the imp" from behind the Lord of Casterly Rock, and he relaxed and nodded. Lord Lannister continued, at the very least legitimizing them would enable you to expand House Baratheon beyond its current size and allow you to found, if need be, cadet branches. There was a silence after he stopped speaking and everyone eyed him carefully. Barristan found himself wondering what that cool appraisal had cost him inside. Just days before he had thought that his grandson would be king, and now he was giving advice to the man who had disinherited the boy and his siblings. But then they were not the king's children. None of this was normal. Politic. He wasn't sure what the word was. Lord Lannister's advice is sage, Your Grace. The words came from Lord Stark. I agree with it wholeheartedly. Do not rule any one option out. Consider legitimizing the bastards, marry again, and in the meantime keep Lord Stannis as your heir. And if anyone complains about legitimizing the bastards, then they are fools, the Lord Commander rumbled. You need Baratheons. Besides, all three here are good lads and lasses. So what if Gendry was brought up a blacksmith? Aegon the Unlikely ran about the realm as squire to a hedge knight. At the Night's Watch we see all kinds of people. You'd be surprised at who shows their true mettle up there once they arrive. Edric is half Florent. The Tyrells will be wary of him automatically, Lord Baratheon mused thoughtfully. But then they'd be wary of Shireen and the new babe, if it's born healthy. Not that I give a damn about what Mace Tyrell thinks. The king issued a short guffaw. Well. He paused and then frowned. You have made excellent points, all of you. Sir Barristan, anything to add? Just that the King's Guard will serve your heirs loyally, Your Grace, no matter who they are or what their background is. And then there was a sudden knock on the door, or rather a sudden staccato series of knocks. Your Grace. It was Greenfield and he sounded rather shaken. Barristan strode to the door and at a nod from the king opened the door. Greenfield was on the other side, along with young Lords Robb and Jon. And behind them stood the Blackfish. We need to see His Grace the King, Lord Robb said quietly. He nodded at them and allowed them in, staring hard at the Blackfish and the odd tall blonde woman in armor that followed him. And then he blinked as an even taller man stepped into the room, ducking under the lintel to allow access for the antlers on his hood. The moment that the tall man entered, Lord Stark stood so suddenly that his chair slid back. Everyone stared at him and then looked back at the tall man, who seemed to be vaguely amused. You're a green man, from the Isle of Faces. Lord Stark seemed stunned. Then he seemed to see the Blackfish. Brynden. Ned the grizzled older man said with a nod. Your Grace, my lords. I present the Lady Brienne of Tarth. And the Green Man, of the Isle of Faces. Not a green man, Ned. The Green Man. The tall man with antlers lowered his hood and then the world seemed to freeze in place as he felt all the blood flee his face. He knew that face. It was older, but he knew it. But that was impossible. Given the gasp from Lord Lannister, he was not the only one to recognize the Green Man. You. Me, the Green Man said as he looked at them all. Lord Stark. Your Grace. I am the Green Man. I was once known as Sir Duncan the Tall. And we have much to talk about. Barristan. He drummed his fingers on the ledge of the window that he was staring out of. The high tower stood there in the harbor, tall and proud and baffling. The gate annoyed him. He had been there with Marwyn and Ibros, he'd seen the spot where the Septon had died. Twice. He'd felt the terror from that thing. The gate. He'd heard the sounds. The pounding. What was it? Who was it? They suspected who know, but they didn't know. The drowned god. Had Lord Tyrell, somehow drained and emaciated as he lay there dying, been right about what lay beyond the gate? A door opened to one side and Ambrose walked in tiredly and then sat heavily down on a chair before peering at him. You seem unsettled. That bloody gate. He spat the last word bitterly. I want to know what it is. I want to see what it's made from, I want to know what that noise is, I want to read those runes properly. But the closer I get to it the more I want to piss myself. A bitter smile crossed his face. I imagine that Marwyn's language is even worse. Ambrose chuckled wryly. Oh, far worse. He turned his gaze from the window to Peristan. Young Tali is running around a great deal on this matter. Consulting books, returning them to the shelves, getting more down, he's a whirlwind of activity. Reminds me of his father at times. He's also neglecting himself. Needs to remember to eat more. Peristan snorted. He can afford to miss a few meals. There's less of him than there was when he arrived. His cheekbones are threatening to make an appearance. I'm keeping an eye on the boy. I know that his father is not fond of him, due to his unmartial nature, but he would take it amiss if he died of self-neglect. You're not the only one. The Kitchens are fond of him for his latest idea. Ambrose peered at him. What are you talking about? He's had this idea of a simple foodstuff. Ham and cheese between two pieces of bread. It's easy to make and a lot of the younger maesters love them. The cooks are torn between affront as such a simple foodstuff and delight at being able to feed so many in the citadel so cheaply. He smiled slightly. They call them Samwells. An odd thing, to hear people call for a plate of Samwells. And for the first time in a few days Ambrose actually laughed. After a moment he sobered a little. A plate of Samwells. Fame of a sort. He looked at Peristan. If he solves the riddle he is working on he will have a greater fame. Peristan sighed. He's making better progress than I am. The lad has an eye for the runes. And with every record of the runes that he digs up, he gets closer to the inscription on the gate. He was right, there are inscriptions near the Isle of Faces, and more in a cave near High Heart. The first men were allied with the children of the forest, or those who sing the Song of Earth, as they called themselves. We know that the first men could speak their language. Bran the Builder was said to have used what he knew to build the wall, with magic. He fell silent, his thoughts elsewhere. Ironic, isn't it? Ambrose spoke the very words that he was thinking. We who seek the truth of the way that the world works suddenly need to comprehend how something as slippery and unreliable as magic works. Gods. It waxes and wanes, it relies on powers that we cannot explain, it makes me want to tear out what remains of my hair. But we must understand it. If Lord Tyrell is right about what his father said, he scowled. How do you kill a god who is, as the Ironborn say, dead but will not die? Peristan sighed. This fist of Ned Stark's, it must be the Fist of Winter. Another legend made fact by recent events. He snorted. We might as well rename parts of the archives the Legendarium. Legends seem to come to life on all sides of us with every day that passes. A silence fell and he looked over at Ambrose, who seemed to be struggling with something. What is it? Too much time has passed. This made no sense. What do you mean? Too much time has passed. Ambrose made a frustrated gesture with one hand. I think that the first men knew that the others would return, that things like the gate were vitally important. I think that they must have had a plan, a warning network at the very least, something to act as a tripwire. Signs and portents. But time stifles and kills memories, especially when combined with invasions of people like the Andals. Proof of the return of the others is still. Ravens arrive every day from maesters who have seen the cages carried by men of the Night's Watch. Cages that contain heads and hands of wights. They'll come to the citadel soon, it is inevitable. Proof of wights. Therefore, it follows, proof of the others. Because without one the other cannot exist. He looked at his feet for a long moment and then he looked out of the window again at the high tower. Everything we thought we knew is being upended. A grunt came from Ambrose as he stood tiredly. No. Just, added to. The truth is just, more complex than we had thought. He paused. I'm peckish. I need a Samwell or two. Ned. You're dead. The words came from the lips of Tywin Lannister, who had turned as pale as milk. You're dead. You died at Summerhall. How can this be? The tall old man looked at him, his mouth working briefly, and then he sighed slightly and strode to the nearest chair, where he quirked an eye at Robert and, on receiving a curt baffled nod, sat down. And then he shrugged off his cape and rolled up one sleeve to reveal horrific burn scars on that arm. I almost died. Everyone stared at the arm, with the exception of the Blackfish and the odd tall woman who was with him. Brienne of Tarth, the Evenstar's daughter. They were standing next to each other, and then he noticed that both wore similar brooches in the shape of antlers. The Green Man looked around the room and then sighed heavily. Very well. It's a tale that I will only tell the ones here, as the memories are dark ones. He paused for a long moment. It was supposed to be the day that the dragons returned to Westeros. Instead it was the day that dragons of another sort died. Robert stirred uneasily and the Green Man looked straight at him. You must let go of your hatred of the Targaryens, Robert Baratheon. They are not a threat to you, not now. And their dragons are important. His oldest friend went rather red in the face for a long moment, but then nodded choppily, although Ned could not tell if the nod was in acknowledgement or agreement. Stannis also stirred, probably at the way that the Green Man had referred to his brother as merely Robert Baratheon. We thought that we were being safe. My king, he was the best of the Targaryens. Aegon the Unlikely. He assembled 7 dragons and oh so many of his family. He planned what he thought would be a safe way of hatching the eggs and binding the dragons to the Targaryens. Oh, so much planning. All for naught. The old man tilted his head to one side, his eyes closed for a long moment. When they opened again there was pain in his gaze. I always wondered how the fire went out of control. I once thought that it had been a conspiracy in some form, that a Maester had tainted the wildfire somehow. There had always been rumors about how the Maesters had somehow been behind the deaths of the last dragons, especially how pitiful the last dragon had been. But from what I know now, it was not the Maesters. A pyromancer wanted to be a bit too helpful. He brewed a batch of wildfire that was hotter than the others. He wanted to help his king. And he doomed him instead. The fire went out of control so quickly. All of a sudden there was fire everywhere. People panicked. My king ordered an immediate evacuation and then organized it. I wanted him to lead the people out. But no. He and his son Duncan said they had a duty to get everyone out. Another sigh came from the old man. I got the Princess Ruller out. She was deeply shocked and almost didn't realize that she was in labor at first. I carried her out, and as the flames leapt higher and higher to one side I helped her to birth her son then and there on the ground. Rhaegar Targaryen. The moment he opened his eyes and looked at me I knew somehow that fate would not be kind to him. I wrapped him in my white cloak, left him in her arms and then ran back into the burning building. It was utterly silent in the room as they all looked at the Green Man, who was visibly struggling with dark and bitter memories. I found him grievously injured, kneeling over the body of his son. My namesake. Duncan the Small. The former Kingsguard visibly struggled for words. I tried to get to them, I really did. But everything was on fire, even the flagstones in places. The roof above us was starting to collapse, and then Aegon gave me his last command. He said that it was too late for him, that I had to go, now. He told me to run. To leave him with his boy. I didn't want to go. He was more than my king, he was my friend, we had been through so much together, he and I, but he told me to go. He commanded me to go. His face crumpled for a moment, before he ran his hand over his face. So I did. He said the words with a flat, almost stark, inflection. I left my king to die there. Not that it was, well, it hard. In so many ways. The way I had entered was gone a mass of flame. The roof was starting to go, and as I ran to one side I heard a creak and a groan, and then it came down where my king had been and he was gone. I ran through the blazing corridors, choking from the smoke, knowing I had very little time left. I knew of a servant's tunnel, where they could bring in wine, and I headed for that, almost getting lost in the chaos and smoke and flames. I had to kick a door down before I could get to it, and it was at least cooler there, but as I ran I realized that my arm was on fire and I tried to beat it out as I ran. I was screaming, I was pulling off my armor. I barely remember anymore. The green man clenched his scarred hand as if in remembered pain. How I beat it out I will never know. All I remember is being outside, in the cool air, up to my knees in the water of the lake near Summer Hall, looking at the funeral pyre of my friend and king, and all his hopes. He fell silent and there was a pause as they all kept looking at him. And then he stirred, and it was as if a spell had been broken. I wandered after that, here and there. I was half delirious from pain and loss and grief. I remember passing through villages and trying